Hello, everyone, and welcome to special coverage of tonight's Liberal leadership debate. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa. In just 15 minutes, candidates vying to become Liberal leader and Canada's next Prime Minister will face off in the first of two debates. Frank Baylis, Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, and Karina Gould are set to take the stage in Montreal tonight. They'll debate in French, and tomorrow in English. For our special coverage, I'm joined by the CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, and some very familiar faces. Jonathan Baylis is with us. He is a former Quebec advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, just in case you thought he was old enough to work for Pierre. Emily Nicola is a columnist. That's a joke, Jonathan. You look way too young. Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. And here with me in studio, Vandana Cotter was also an advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Carlene Varian is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. Okay, before we get in to a discussion of tonight, we have some breaking news from the Liberal leadership race. There was an appeal today on the disqualification of Ruby Dalla from the race. And we have a statement from the Liberal Party, the executive director, national director, Azam Ismail, saying that after an exchange of written submissions and an oral hearing, the Liberal Party of Canada's Permanent Appeals Committee confirmed the decision of the Leadership Vote Committee to disqualify Dr. Ruby Dalla from the 2025 Liberal leadership race. So there you go. Ruby Dalla disqualified on Friday. She appealed it today, and tonight has been told that her appeal has been denied. Right there you can see the four candidates gathering on the stage in Montreal. That's Mark Carney on the left. That's Chrystia Freeland next to him. Karina Gould and Frank Baylis, the four remaining candidates in this race. I also believe that that is the order in which they're going to stand at the lecterns on that stage as they debate for 2 hours in French tonight. A series of topics beginning with Canada's place in the world, dealing with Canada-U.S. relations, building a strong economy, supporting the Canadian population, where issues like affordability, housing, and safer communities will be discussed, and climate action will be the fourth and final topic on protecting our environment while securing Canada's energy future. So, Rosie, why don't you start us off? Those are the four candidates. Those are the four topics squeezed into 2 hours in French. What are you watching for tonight?
I mean, it's a long time, 2 hours, right? That's a long time to be sort of on your game in your second language and trying to get attention and maybe do a little bit of damage to Mark Carney, to the front runner. I was just trying to watch their body language a little bit because they're all very experienced, capable people, but they've never done this. Mm-hmm. And the stakes are very high. Obviously, the stakes are incredibly high for Mark Carney because he's the front runner. He should be the one who is most expected, I think, to be the target of tonight. But I also think the stakes are pretty high for Chrystia Freeland. This is her moment to try and break through the narrative. I don't know that there's enough time to make up in terms of where Mark Carney is, but it's at least her shot today and tomorrow to get some attention back and try and convince people that she is a better candidate in this moment than Mark Carney.
Okay, well let's go to our Quebec pundits tonight to get their sense of what's at stake. So, Jonathan, you were Justin Trudeau's for a period of time, his advisor on Quebec. No Francophones in this debate, no Quebecers in this debate. What do they need to do this evening to reach Quebec Liberals while also speaking to a broader audience than that?
Well, I think that they're aiming for somewhere around solid, not just passable. I think it has to be solid. It has to be conversational. They can't be afraid to make mistakes in French. That'll force them into hesitating and being unclear about the actual message they want to send out. They have to just accept that they're going to make the odd mistake, maybe more than that. None of them are fluently bilingual. There's no Justin Trudeau there. There's no Dominic LeBlanc. There's no Paul Martin. I'm not talking about people who are actually Anglophones. I'm talking about people who are fluently bilingual, and when they speak one or the other, you're not even sure if that's their first or second language. None of them have that ability. There are degrees here. I think what you're going to see with Mark Carney is the person who's most out of practice. And then you're going to see others who are, have spoken French a lot over the last number of years, but it's not their go-to. They're not instinctively Francophone. How much of it in their brain are they translating, and how much of it are they automatically speaking in French? And lastly, what I'm expecting a little bit of an uneven beginning because none of them have done this before, as you mentioned.
Right.
But none of them are natural-born politicians. There is no Justin Trudeau or Dominic LeBlanc or François-Philippe Champagne or Mélanie Joly or Pierre Poilievre for that matter. None of them who just sort of eat and breathe politics. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they'll be more natural. But to begin with, I'm expecting them to be a little nervous, and we'll see how that flows. So,
Emily, up till now, they've been speaking to the 400,000 registered Liberals, right? The 1% of the Canadian population that have signed up to vote. Tonight and tomorrow, they start reaching out to the 40 million Canadians, the 100% of the population, trying to make their case to them. What are you watching for as a journalist, as a non-Liberal, in this tonight?
First of all, I just wanted to point out that Frank Baylis is a Quebecer. I think it's important to note that.
Right. I apologize on that. I know his parents are from the UK and the Caribbean. I didn't know if you. Yes, I apologize for that. You're right on that.
Yeah. So he's from Montreal. So we'll see actually about his French. I think a lot of people don't know him at all, and so it's going to be a good opportunity for him to get to be known a little bit better. That being said, I think we're in a moment where, to be very frank, people have decided in their minds that Mark Carney is the next Liberal leader. And I think the challenge for tonight is to, first of all, pretend that there's still a leadership race happening, if I may put it very bluntly. And then it's up to, as well, Mark Carney to prove that he actually speaks French. He's been doing some interviews already with Patrice Roy, for example, but that is a more, I'd say, prepared format in which he's very much rehearsed the vocabulary he needs to have at hand in that specific situation. And so we'll see how he does in a more ad-lib conversation. It's a different setting. I think the one person who could also stand out tonight in a way that could never hurt is actually Karina Gould, because she's more unknown. She's been doing really well so far in terms of fundraising numbers, and she is one of the most comfortable in French in that panel as well. And so Chrystia Freeland is somebody that, obviously she's been Minister of Finance, everybody knows her already. Right. But Mark Carney, Karina Gould are two people that might benefit from this debate or not. And Frank Baylis is frankly the wild card here, because he's there as somebody who has nothing to lose. And sometimes that creates an energy in which people are willing to be bolder and create a little bit of a chaos if that's going to help draw some attention. And so we'll see we'll see about that as well.
So Vandana, what are you watching for here in terms of the tactic and the approach they'll take? I mean, Carney does come in this as a perceived front runner. How do the other candidates calibrate between advancing their self-interest without committing sort of self-harm on the party?
Yeah, I think that's the issue they're all going to kind of face, especially Chrystia Freeland. I think going back to Mr. Carney, going back for when me and John used to share an office, what we look for is who is sitting in these small ridings, in these small towns where you have to gain some seats and talk to people at the Legion office, at the local pub and whatnot. So going back to what John said about conversational, that is important. Maybe not for today, but people want to say, like, is it manageable? Can I send him to a small town in Quebec and get him, because for the Liberal Party especially, the way to get to government is through Quebec. So that's going to be really important. I think Karina and Frank will have the best French ability in terms of being able to speak conversationally, be quick on their toes. I think for Chrystia Freeland, with the risk for her, I think she's been struggling quite a bit. I think first because a lot of people didn't like the way she went at the Prime Minister, the way she ended things and kind of launched all of this. But I did find that throughout her campaign, you're seeing smaller groups. It's hard to compete. Mark Carney seems to have really big crowds that people are wondering, are they AI generated or are they real? And what she's going to want to showcase is like, listen, like, either way, I'm really the best to serve as the leader of this party. I've done this before, and I think her going head-to-head with Mark Carney, that's going to be the most interesting thing. And how she does it. Is she going to be overly aggressive, which could also be not helpful to her, or is she going to be able to make that case that maybe you don't like what I did, but you know I'm more qualified for this?
Carlene, how do you see it? I mean, the Chrystia Freeland narrative in this race is, she's tried to argue that Carney is the PMO candidate when she was the Deputy Prime Minister and a senior minister for every year right up until the last few months in this government.
I mean, in fairness, I don't think that's her top line message, but I do see what you're saying. I think that for Freeland, it's certainly an opportunity here for her to be on more familiar ground where she's very experienced, right? A debate is a similar environment to being on the floor of the House of Commons when you're taking punchy, aggressive attack questions from the opposition parties for an hour every single day. And she's done that for the last 9 years, as has Karina Gould as well, by the way. What's interesting to me about tonight is that the front runner in this race is at the very moment that the leadership race is shifting for the first time really onto a national stage with eyes beyond the Liberal Party membership, you're having the frontrunner be in the environment where he is arguably the least strong and has the least experience. So as Rosie said it a minute ago, the stakes are probably highest for Carney here. For the others, if they manage to land a few solid lines and clips, I think that gives them momentum going into the English debate tomorrow night. But for Carney, it's probably get off a solid performance, avoid any major stumbles in the French language that would weaken confidence in his ability to campaign in Quebec on the ground during a general election, and then he's good.
Rosie, I mean, what's your sense of how the dynamic might play out? I mean, what were you hearing from Chrystia Freeland's team sort of in particular about, I was told the phrase, we're going to see Chrystia unleashed. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I don't know that I know that particular person. I've never seen Chrystia Freeland unleashed. I was told we would see her show her heart, show her real self, be not attached to anyone or any other thing, that she would just sort of take up the stage. That's how they want her to position herself. I think there's a risk to Chrystia Freeland and to Mark Carney, and I think it's kind of the same risk. Chrystia Freeland can, and I know this from personal experience, when she is pushed hard, responds in kind and can be aggressive, which is fine in certain dynamics, might work here, but I'm not sure that it will work. So we'll see. And then I would say the same for Mark Carney. Again, not someone who is, I would suggest, used to being challenged on a regular basis. And so, again, if we see some of that, I will be watching to see how he responds. Because you do have to show you have some fight. I think we all agree with that. You have to show that you want this, and you have to show that you know how to take some swings. You can't damage your other leadership contenders. But it's how you respond to those swings that I am more interested in, because that's what Pierre Poilievre is good at, right? That's his claim to fame. So how will they respond to any jibes that they get from their colleagues here?
So quickly, Karina.
Yeah, can I just jump on that?
Yeah.
I think as a Liberal Party member, what I would be watching for tonight is I need to know if Mark Carney is going to be the leader of my party. What he has to get up on the stage and do tonight, I need to have the confidence that he can do that 40 days in a row for a general election campaign. That is a lot of pressure. There is no room for a leader to screw up in a general. And if he shows sort of an ounce of weakness or hesitation, that then would shake my confidence in his ability to sustain a general election campaign.
Okay, so Jonathan, on that point, I mean, Carney, untested that way. Chrystia Freeland has been in election campaigns, but never as the main character. And same with Karina Gould and Frank Baylis. So how do you expect, what sort of a test do you expect Carney to face tonight on that front?
Again, he's got to have a handle on all these different issues. He's got to be able to react quickly. He's got to be able to do it in his second language. He can't be hesitating, but he can't be talking like a professor or a banker. So he has to weave all that in while weaving in a little bit of a Quebec taste to everything, a flavor to each of his answers. So if it's supporting Canadians, are we talking about daycare, childcare? Well, compare it to Quebec. If you're talking about Quebec place in the world, bring in aluminum. Like those types of things, when you do it and sound authentic, that's how you win. But it's also, if you don't do it well, it's how you can lose.
Emily, how do you throw some of that Quebec character in without looking like you're pandering? Because as an Atlantic Canadian, people will come to town and make jokes about Screech and kissing the cod, and it rings a little bit hollow. How do you do that in Quebec? And we're less than a minute to the start of the debate, so I'll give the time to you.
If you have less than a minute, I will say that the one word that we'll be watching for is pipelines, and whether or not Mark Carney will speak profoundly about pipelines in French as he has been doing in English. And so I think it's important to understand, first of all, there's not just Francophones in Quebec. There's going to be a lot of people across the country watching this. But as far as Quebec is concerned, there's also specific policy issues. And that is perhaps one of the most contentious ones. There is as well. And so I'm going to be watching for ways in which there's actual policy debates that are happening, and whether or not people are ready to assume some of their positions that are not necessarily as popular among Quebecers.
Okay, you're great on time. We're just seconds away from the start of the Liberal leadership debate. Tonight's debate is broken into 4 phases, being moderated by former TVA Quebec anchor Pierre Jobin, and it will follow 4 themes: Canada's place in the world, growing a strong economy, supporting Canadians, and protecting the environment. So our panel will be here throughout the night. We'll be watching this. I'll be watching with translation. The people in this group who speak French well will be watching it without translation, and we'll be assessing the style, performance, and the content of this throughout the evening after it happens. Looks like it's not quite ready to go just yet. They're 30 seconds behind schedule. So Vandana, just on this, when you look at those topics, they were picked by the Liberal Party, I think, with a polling assessment, of Liberal members. I'm not sure if that was the decisive one, or if they wanted broad themes that were safer topics. When you look at the suite of issues they're going to be dealing with, what do you make of why they went in this direction as a party?
I went with this direction because they know that more than just Liberal Party members are watching this tonight. I think a lot of people, even when I go to my day job, people are talking about this. They're talking about Mark Carney, talking about Chrystia Freeland, they're talking about Liberal leadership. So I think regardless of Liberal members or not, lots of people are watching, and the topic of the day is tariffs in Canada and the world. The Prime Minister today was in Ukraine, talking a lot about working with our European allies and on Ukraine and whatnot. So I think people are wondering, and Trump has changed the game. People are wondering how to keep this country safe, and I think they chose these topics. So they know there'll be an election in a shorter time than we think, and therefore they need to go to a broader general public as much as possible.
Just on this, the disruption of the opinion environment, Carlene, I know Liberals for a long time, in the hopes that Justin Trudeau could rebound, talked about an external event that would change things to help them out. This has happened. But it's not to Justin Trudeau's benefit necessarily. Okay, the opening animation of the debate is starting to play. So I think we're getting ready to go to Montreal as a Liberal official leadership of first the French language debate. And here we go to Montreal and the Liberal French language debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Pierre Germain. Welcome to this debate for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada this evening. First of all, a word on the position of the candidates, on the set as well as the order that they will give their opening speech and closing speech, which was determined by a random draw. The same thing for the questions. Here are the candidates from left to right on my set. Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gould, and Frank Baylis, left to right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. So here are the rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to make their opening statement. The debate will be on 4 themes this evening, which were selected by a survey of Liberals: the place of Canada in the world, building a stronger economy, supporting the Canadian population, and we will also talk about climate action. And for each of these 4 themes, the candidates will have 1 minute to answer a question, which will be followed by a second question for all candidates for a debate of 5 minutes among them. And at the end of the evening, each candidate will have 90 seconds for a closing statement. Some of the questions that will be asked this evening were sent in by Liberals registered throughout the country. None of the questions asked this evening was seen either by the candidates or their teams. And throughout the debate, one of my responsibilities will be to ensure that candidates have a time to speak, equitable time to speak, rather than a timed equal time. Now, I ask you to exercise some discipline in the debate, and let's try and respect the time. And if I have to, I will have to call you to order and break in. But I know that you're all wise people with a lot of experience and you'll respect all the rules. So let's go, and we'll start with your 90-second opening statements, and I hand over right away to Mr. Baylis.
Good evening. My name is Frank Baylis. I'm a professional engineer. As a businessman, I built up many businesses in the health sector, and with that, I created thousands of employments in high technology sectors. I recognize that collectively, we are facing important challenges. Having said that, I'm very optimistic for the future. Yes, I do have hope for Canada and faith in Canadians. And I have a plan so that we can develop our full potential. This evening, I'm going to concentrate on 3 priorities. First is to build a strong economy, a resilient economy, which will benefit us all. Secondly, I want to improve our health system so that it will become the best health system in the world. And thirdly, I also want to modernize the federal government so that it can deliver programs and services and do it more efficiently for the benefit of our citizens. Together, we will build a Canada that is proud and prosperous for all Canadians. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Baylis. Madame Gould, c'est à votre tour.
Thank you, Mr. Baylis. Madam Gould.
Thank you. The future is what unites us here tonight. Coming from a middle-class family in Burlington, Ontario, and now, as a mother of 2 young children, I understand what Canadians are living through. They're concerned. They want to know if they can pay their mortgage, fill their gas tank, or even retire. We are facing serious challenges for our economy and our sovereignty. But this challenge also offers us amazing opportunities. I'm very proud to be Canadian, especially today. Citizens throughout the country are mobilizing. We have the opportunity of regaining the confidence of Canadians, of uniting our country to defend our economy and to protect our values against threats coming from south of the border, and to counter our version of Trump here in Canada. I didn't enter politics to become someone. I decided to go into politics to help my fellow Canadians and to do good things. With a decade of experience, I know how to get there. A prosperous future where Canadians are at the heart of every decision. Our adversaries say that Canada is broken, but we know that this is a wonderful country. Tonight, I'm going to talk about my projects so that our country can be even stronger. I am the candidate for today and the future.
Thank you, Madam Gould.
Freeland.
Madam Freeland.
A few weeks ago in Saskatoon, I met a little 4-year-old girl. She asked me whether I could prevent Trump from invading our country. And that's why I am standing to lead the Liberal Party and to become the next Prime Minister of Canada. Trump represents the greatest threat to Canada since World War II. He is threatening us with an economic war, and that's nothing new. The last time that he was president, he threatened us too, and at the end of the day, I succeeded in protecting our economy. But this time, Trump's threats are worse. He wants to turn Canada into the 51st state, and it's no joke. That is why he is supporting Vladimir Putin's criminal attempt to redraw Ukraine's borders. Trump wants to redraw our borders too. We need a leader who understands the seriousness of these challenges and how to face them. A leader that can respond and defend everyone in our wonderful country. I will fight for us. I will fight for Canada. And together, we will win.
Thank you, Ms. Freeland. Mr. Carney now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jobin. I'm Mark Carney. I was born in the Northwest Territories, and I grew up in Edmonton. Throughout my life, I've had the opportunity to serve our country as Governor of the Bank of Canada during the financial crisis of 2008. At this time, Canada is facing the worst crisis of our lifetime, and to get through it, we have to make big changes. I can be useful there. I know how to get through crises. I know how to build a strong economy. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty. And in a crisis, there are things that you can't control. But you have to focus on the things that you can control. We are the masters in our own house, and I know that we can control our own economic destiny. I have a plan to invest more in you, a plan that makes our businesses more competitive, a plan that builds a strong economy that works for everyone. Canadians are ready to stand up for Canada. So am I. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. So let's now attack theme one of the evening, Canada's place in the world. We've been speaking about it since his election. Donald Trump wants to impose tariffs on Canada of 25% on all commercial products exported to the United States, and of course, making Canada the 51st United States state. You will have 1 minute each to answer to the question in the order that was set out earlier. So this is a question of getting warmed up, because as we move along, the debates will get a little bit warmer. So a question from the public to start off, from Diane Bonnet from the Quebec, who's asking how Canada can improve its commercial relations with other countries than the United States. 1 minute, and Ms. Freeland starts.
That is an excellent question, because you understand that Trump represents the greatest threat to Canada since World War II. What we need today is allies, and we have to find them and work with them. And I know how to do that. I am the minister who forged a free trade agreement with the European Union and who signed an agreement with Asia-Pacific countries. We need those allies more than ever. You put an economic question. We need to work together on the economy. We need to work on tariffs in reprisal against those imposed by Trump, and we need to work to cooperate better than ever on national security. We have to work with our allies to protect our economy and our security.
Well, thank you, Ms. Freeland. Second answer, Mr. Baylis.
It's an excellent question, because we know that at the present time, 80% of our trade goes towards exports go to the United States. That's why I propose a new economic bloc that would gather Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. Why? Because we share the same kind of government. We share the same kinds of values, the same language. Well, of course, the English language as a common language, and it means that we can work together closely. And not only that, but when I was in England and I also sold products worldwide, and I recognize the importance of having agreements of this kind, international trade agreements, especially when we want to harmonize regulation. It really helps to have our products travel throughout the world. So it's a plan that I propose for Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Baylis. Ms. Gould.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Diane for this excellent question. Most Canadians are thinking about this very thing. One thing that we learned after the first Trump presidency is that we had to adapt and broaden trade relationships with many other countries. Chrystia spoke about free trade agreements with Europe, but also with Asia and Latin America. And what the federal government can do is to help Canadian businesses to access these important markets. We have to understand that Canada has a lot to offer the world, but we have to help businesses to diversify from the U.S. and to enter into these new markets. That is what a government under my leadership will do.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. Mr. Carney.
Well, thank you, Diane, for your question. First of all, I'd like to point out that Canada will never, ever be part of the U.S. in terms of diversification of our allies and our trade allies. We can focus on the free trade agreement with the EU, CETA, but we have to have levers. We have to leverage our assets. We have to become a superpower of clean energy. We have to create supply chains for critical minerals and metals. We have to use our culture that we have here, especially here in Montreal and Quebec. And we have to have a relationship with jurisdictions and countries like the EU, the Francophonie, and the UK that share the same values that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. So let's follow up with the second question. So this question is a follow-up question. You have 1 minute to answer. Mr. Baylis will be answering. And then a 5-minute debate amongst you will follow. So why should Quebecers and Canadians, Mr. Baylis, believe that you are the best placed candidate to defend Canada's interest in this commercial war with the United States?
Well, I've already negotiated hundreds of contracts with Americans, and from time to time, I've seen Mr. Trump's character at work, and I know how to deal with him. And on this issue, I published an article in the newspapers just one day before Inauguration Day. And I said that he wasn't... I said that he was going to target steel first, and that's exactly what he did. So I can't predict what he's going to do, and that's why I feel that I can prepare our defense and our counterattack as well.
Does anyone want to answer?
Because I've already done it. I've negotiated with Mr. Trump. I negotiated NAFTA, the new NAFTA, and we succeeded in getting a better agreement. This is not the first time that Mr. Trump is threatening us with tariffs against tariffs on steel and aluminium. We responded with counter tariffs, dollar for dollar, and at the end of the day, we won. A response has to be intelligent, and if we remain united, we will win. I know how to do that.
So just how far can we go, Mr. Carney?
Well, we have to recognize that today's Trump is very different from the Trump of the past. He's more isolationist, he's more aggressive. In the past, he wanted our markets. Now he wants our country. So we have to focus on the things that we control. We can't control President Trump, but we can be a master in our own house. We have to strengthen our economy immediately, and that will strengthen our negotiating position.
Thank you, Mark. And what you're saying is absolutely true. And we do need to reinforce our economy, but we need to stand up for the Canadian economy faced with Donald Trump. And what I'm very proud to see is how Canadians throughout the country are standing up against Donald Trump's threats. And we're going to succeed because Canada is strong, but also we are doing things smartly, and Chrystia did excellent work with Kuzma the first time, and we can't respond in the same way this time around. But what the President does respect is force, and I know how to respond to people that I don't agree with. I do it in the House of Commons. I've been doing this for many years.
Not easy.
No, it's not easy. It's not easy.
Madam Freeland?
But I have confidence in Canada and the Canadian team and the unity of our country.
I completely agree with you, Karina. I am so proud of the very personal response of Canadians across the country. But I don't agree that we can't respond to President Trump and win. Canada is strong. That's important. We are the largest market for the U.S. We're more important and larger than China, the UK, and France and Japan combined. So we need to mobilize the U.S. with a strong response.
Two sub-questions. Mr. Gould talking about reopening the trade agreement. Is that a good idea? To reopen the free trade agreement with the U.S.
Well, the previous agreement is over. He's already ripped it up. That's a fact. I'd like to add something to what Chrystia just said. The U.S. needs us. They need us. They do. But in a negotiation with this president, you have to be clear. What's never on the table? Culture, for example. Our resources like water, for example. Supply management. Those are off the table. That's how you start a negotiation.
And we have to start with sovereignty.
Even more than that, we cannot leave our industries behind. It's not just those issues. There's also aluminum in Quebec, the forestry industry, the agricultural industry. I said that one of the first things that I would do as a prime minister is to protect supply management. I would say this in my speech from the throne. We need to stand up for all Canadians and our economy. This is not up for bargaining.
Last question. François Gould is talking about possible closing off hydroelectricity exports to the States. Now, in your plans of counterattacks against Mr. Trump, the exports of electricity, could they be cut?
I welcome that idea by Premier Legault. It's very important to work with provincial leaders on tariffs, and it's extremely good that he's ready to use anything.
Well, you have to keep all your cards close to your chest. I agree with what Chrystia said about this. It can include semiconductors, oil, and other Canadian resources. Those are assets that Americans need.
We need to make sure that, as my colleagues mentioned, Canada is strong, and so there's a lot of things that we have that the Americans need, and we need to make sure that whether it be individual Americans or the U.S. president, they need to understand that they're depending on Canadian resources.
Our 5 minutes are up. 15 seconds.
Nous avons déjà une entente en place. Alors, de parler d'un compromis ou de parler de négocier une troisième version de l'entente, ça donne rien.
It's important to understand that we already have an agreement in place, so there's no point. Trump is a hard negotiator, but I know how to deal with him. I have the experience that will tell me how to deal with him. So it's not opening a third negotiation, it's a different plan.
Let's move on to our next question. Team Canada approach was adopted to react to Trump's threats. How to ensure that the various governments of Canada, provincial, territorial and federal, work together against the American threats, because the day that 2 or 3 provinces start infighting and are no longer agreed, then Mr. Trump will have a lot of fun seeing the conflict at home. So, Ms. Freeland, you're up first.
That's really an excellent question, and thank you for pointing out the ideas that Premier Legault is raising. I've always said that with the United States, we need to be united, strong and smart, and that begins with unity. And unity begins with very hard work with premiers, provincial and territorial premiers, and I know how to achieve that because I've already done it during the first NAFTA negotiations, and I did it during the pandemic. We worked very closely with the U.S. I know that today there's a wave of patriotism across the country. I meant during COVID we worked very closely with premiers. I know that Quebecers and the people of Quebec will strongly support a united approach across Canada, and as Prime Minister I will be the leader who will unite and defend the country.
Mr. Carney.
Well, the Prime Minister, no matter he or she is, must convene the premiers of all the provinces and territories, and that must be done immediately to do 2 things. First of all, to create one single Canadian economy, not 13 different ones. If we have one single Canadian economy, the positive impact will be more than more than the negative impact of Mr. Trump's tariffs. That's the first thing. Second thing, we have to have a strategy, as you've said. It has to be a Team Canada strategy, and it's the responsibility of the Prime Minister of Canada to lead that strategy.
Madam Gould.
Thank you. President Trump will be there for 4 years. So We have to have a relationship with him because he's going to try to create a chaos, but we do need a calm leader, a leader able to unite people, and that's an excellent idea to make sure that we have meetings with the Council of the Federation, frequent meetings, but to choose industries and to decide what can be negotiated, that's not possible. I agree to make sure that we have one economy and not 13, and that we need to tear down our domestic trade barriers, but we also have to respect the differences between provinces and territories. One of these trade barriers has to do with French language. And so we have to do this in conjunction with the provinces and territories in a way that unites the country so that we can have a strong Team Canada approach.
Well, approximately 50% of our exports towards the States are energy. So you asked a question about electricity coming from Quebec. Mr. Trump says that he's going to slap 25% tariffs on it. No, he's made that threat. What I would say is, why would he stop at 25%? Let's say he goes to 100% tariffs. And then he's going to explain to taxpayers why they have to pay double the price for their electricity. And then he's going to say, no, Mr. Baylis, we're going to send you the bill. And I'm going to tell him, send me the bill. I'm not going to pay it. So it's not going to be me that cuts electricity. It's a question. So if he's the one who's going to end up cutting off electricity himself, because we're not going to pay the tariff on the energy.
I'm going to take some
and that's how we're going to deal with it.
On to the next question, because you talked about the unity of Canadian provinces against Trump. Well, what about the Canadian population? There's a survey that says some 15 to 20% are favorable to being annexed to the United States, and there are some groups who will give voice to their ideas. But how to convince the Canadians who think that they should go that way? How to convince them that they should support Canada and stay united?
That's an excellent question, and it shows one thing that I think we can all agree on, and do all agree on. It's that Pierre Poilievre is completely unable to be the leader that Canada needs now. He's a leader who can't unite Canada. He'd rather sow division, and he's too weak to face up to Trump. That is why the Liberals will win the next election, because we are the party who will defend Canada.
That won't be easy.
If I could enter into the debate, I think that one of the things that we haven't done sufficiently well over the past 10 years is to unite Canadians and to ensure that people are proud to be Canadians. Now, people are hearing about the 51st state, and they're saying no. They're standing up and saying, no, we're very proud to be Canadians. We should have more moments of national pride of who we are as Canadians. And one thing that I'd like to end on, if you'll allow me, is that this polarization in our society, this is something we need to work with people who are feeling marginalized, so that we can have a greater amount of people who feel the Canadian pride.
So go ahead, Mr. Carney.
I totally agree with Karina and Chrystia on the attitude of Canadians. They want to stand up against the Americans, but Mr. Poilievre is trying to divide Canadians. Mr. Poilievre, he's a man who venerates Mr. Trump. He can't negotiate with him.
I completely agree.
Mr. Baylis.
Canada is a proud and strong country. So what are we missing right now is a certain level of leadership at the federal level. So what we're seeing right now is that the provinces are going in all directions. They are armed with goodwill. But we need to be unified. And with a strong leadership at the federal level, we'll be able to do that.
We've seen over the past few weeks that everyone in the country has bound together to fight against this threat. Pierre Poilievre says, well, he's going to do what Trump wants. But for Canadians throughout the land, they stood up. And this makes me so proud to be Canadian.
Okay, fine, everybody.
That's right.
We'll come back to this. But it's true that I added a question because we were talking about Canadians in the province. So let's go now with a follow-up question for a 5-minute debate amongst all Canadians. What would be your concrete actions that Canada should implement, and we're changing the sector to encourage a sustainable solution to the Israeli conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Madam Gould.
Thank you. This is one of the most complicated conflicts in the entire world, and I'm pleased that we finally have a ceasefire. Canada's position should be to work towards peace and security for two peoples, for the Palestinian and the Israeli people, so that they're able to live in peace and security side by side. Where Canada can play an important role is to work on this. There is too much suffering for people in this part of the world. Canada participates in humanitarian missions. We have to make sure that we can provide more humanitarian aid and work with both sides, but also with people throughout the world globally to seek peace. This is our only option.
Who wants to follow up?
I just want to add one thing. When Mr. Trump says things that are false and that violate the international rules-based order, we have to be very clear that we don't agree. Mr. Trump's declarations on Palestinians in Gaza are not acceptable. And more than ever for Canada today, a rules-based international order is extremely important. And we have to be clear that Canada will be a rule of law country.
Mr. Jobin, so we need to reclaim our place on the world stage with confidence, and that means that we have to stop towing the American foreign policy, especially when it comes to the Gaza region. Canada has to be a moral leader. What does that mean? We have to help Palestinians rebuild their civil society. We have to recognize them as a people, and we have to recognize them as a nation. So we should formally recognize Palestine.
We've been trying to do that for years, unsuccessfully.
Yes, we've been talking about it, but we haven't done anything. So I think the time has come to do it formally. And I firmly believe that it's the best way of establishing a durable, sustainable peace.
Mr. Carney, what's your position on this?
Well, first of all hostages must be returned to their families. That's the first thing. Secondly, there needs to be assistance for Gazans. There are two things now which are unacceptable. First of all, Mr. President Trump's idea that Palestine is a big real estate deal, that idea, that commitment by Pierre Poilievre to cancel all international assistance, including to Gaza and Ukraine, that's unacceptable.
I just want to add that I'd like to thank Mark for raising the issue of hostages. I believe that everyone here, all Liberals, will agree that returning the hostages is a priority.
Yes, but our position must be a two-state solution, and we need to work towards peace. And with regards to a future government of a Palestinian state, we must ensure that Hamas does not play a role in that. It's the only way that we will ensure lasting peace. This is what we want.
Just rapidly. So when I say that we should recognize a Palestinian state, it has nothing to do with Hamas. It has to do with the population. We want to help them rebuild. So it's not, I'm not proposing for one moment that we'll work with Hamas.
We all agree on Hamas, on a two-state
No, we don't agree with
solution.
Hamas. No, we're against
Yes,
Hamas,
we're all against
absolutely.
Hamas, we are. And we're in favor of a two-state solution. But it must be a Palestinian state, a viable state, a united state that exists next to a peaceful and secure Israel.
Will we ever see that during our lifetime? Well, we can hope so. So you have a minute each to answer. And I want to ask you how you envisage a dialogue with Mr. Trump. With what tone? Personal? Be it Mar-a-Lago or elsewhere, with what assurance? The president of Poland went to meet him a few days ago, and he had to wait an hour and a half outside of his office to talk for 10 minutes. President Macron was there today. Apparently, he's satisfied of today's meeting, but how Mr. Trump will wake up tomorrow, we have no idea. So I'd like to know, if you're in an office with Mr. Trump, who's very threatening and all of that, so one after the other, tell us, what can you do with this guy? He's very intimidating, no?
I think, first of all, I don't think I'd bother to go seeing him. No, I'm serious. I would send a delegation for discussion purposes, but I wouldn't put myself in a position where he can demonstrate that he wants to be overbearing or intimidating. So he can talk to me, but otherwise I'd send a delegation.
I would begin not by negotiating with President Trump in person, because like all political leaders, President Trump is listening to U.S. voters. It's Americans who are important to him. And that's why we have to begin with a short answer with a list of counter tariffs to put pressure that comes from within the United States.
It's impossible to talk to him. I know you have.
But what I'm saying is that we need to create pressure internally in the States. I would suggest 100% tariffs on Teslas to target Elon Musk, to create pressure within the White House. It worked with steel and aluminium, and that's why we have to begin with a strong response.
Dollar for dollar tariffs. That'll have a maximum impact on the U.S. and a minimum impact here at home. And then we have to reinvest those tariffs in businesses and workers. I think we all agree on that, don't you? Mr. Trump only respects us if we have other options, and this is one of the reasons why we have to build a strong economy here at home. We have to be clear on that. We are a master in our own house. We can resolve the issue here in Canada before we start conversations with him.
1 minute each to answer. 10 seconds.
Yes, but we can't say that we're not going to talk with Mr. Trump. We have to have talks with Mr. Trump. Well, maybe I won't go to Washington, but I will talk to him, and I will explain why Canada is a sovereign country, and that's not up for negotiation, and that we are strong and we're united, but also that there are issues that we need to work on together, and we can find a way to work together against countries.
Well, you had 1 minute each. Some of them went a little bit over,
that are
but
adversaries.
we'll not worry too much about that. No, another question for you. And speaking first to Mr. Carney. Mr. Trudeau was in Ukraine today on his 3rd anniversary of the war. We learned today that Canada will be providing $5 billion, 5,000 armoured car vehicles. Just how far can Canada's financial assistance go, and is that something that might displease Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, Mr. Baylis has just mentioned a moral-based Canadian approach, and I'm very proud of the approach by the government of Canada and by Canadians themselves. It's been their approach to Ukraine has been great. We've supported Ukraine because it's a democracy which is suffering an illegal, unjustified, horrible invasion. I said it at the start of the conflict. I'm proud to be a Canadian. I'm not welcome in Russia. Chrystia either.
Yes, we all are. We all are. Maybe not Pierre
We have to
Poilievre.
have principles. We have to follow them. And any discussion on the future of Ukraine cannot happen without Ukrainian participation.
I'm going to open debate on that point. Just how many billions of dollars can we spend to help Ukraine, and how?
Mr. Jobin, I'll begin by saying that we have to be there. We have to stand with Ukrainians because Ukrainians are defending democracy, their sovereignty, but at the same time, as they're doing that, they're defending our democracy and our sovereignty. Because this war involves the rules-based international order. Can a country decide to redraw another country's borders? That's the issue. We have to use Putin's money. And that's what I did as Minister of Finance. 5 billion. These 5 billion are originated in Russia. It's Russia's money. And there are $250 billion in Russian money in Belgian banks. That money has to be used to help Ukraine. I've already started that work when I was Minister of Finance, and I'll continue.
All of you.
You mentioned that it was the third anniversary of the start of this war, and this was a very somber day today. But last week, we saw that Mr. Trump abandoned the free world because he had talks with Putin. And so Putin started this war. And I think that Canadians can be very proud of our response in Ukraine. But also, we have to be allied with the Europeans. This is our freedom that is on the line. And so I think that you're going to see that we agree with this approach because there's more to lose with the loss of Ukraine. And for Canadians, we are there to defend democracy throughout the world, but also in our own house.
Yes. With Mr. Trump, we're seeing a fundamental shift in the way things are managed on the world stage. And not only that, but he's essentially allied himself with Russia, which is completely unacceptable. So Canada has a role to play with regards to its other allies, NATO allies.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
30 seconds, because
30 seconds for
everybody.
Everyone? Yes, I agree that we have to work with countries, Nordic countries, and Denmark.
Thank you, Chrystia. I'd like to point out that Pierre Poilievre was against the Ukraine free trade agreement for ideological reasons. That's completely outrageous.
So we're going to change themes now. We're moving on to the second theme of tonight's debate, building a strong economy. 1 minute each to answer the first question in the order set earlier. Canada is exiting a difficult period. We have a very impressive deficit of some $60 billion in the last budget. So when do you foresee a return to a balanced budget? Ms. Freeland speaks first.
Mr. Jobin, we are all liberals, and we will not repeat conservative misinformation. We are not going to do the Conservatives' work for them. The reality is that Canada's financial record is very strong. We have a AAA credit rating. We have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the entire G7. But speaking of our economy, we have to begin with the fact that we're living in a completely different world. Let's begin with the threat that Donald Trump poses. And as Karina suggested, we have to seize the opportunity of this wave of Canadian enthusiasm to build, to attract investment and jobs.
Your time is up. So I'm also asking Mr. Carney, $60 billion. How many years does it take to come back to a balanced budget? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Well, I have a plan to balance the budget, the operational budget, in 3 years. But in terms of the budgetary situation here, the fiscal situation, we've seen an increase in spending across the Federation, which has reached an average of 9%. It outstrips our economic growth by 100%. So in order to invest in public services, we have to change the way we manage our spending so that we can get proper results.
To talk about the deficit, you're talking about a tax cut, an increase the military budget, and an increase to 2% for NATO. Where are we going to find the money to ensure that the deficit decreases while yet increasing military expenditures and cutting taxes? Where's the money going to come from?
Well, first of all, this is one of the reasons why military spending is important. It has to be increased between now and the end of the decade. That's important. What's important about military spending is to strengthen the security of Canadians. That's really what's important. That's why we have military spending. It's not just an arbitrary number. It's more important to focus results.
You're saying 3 years we'll get to a balanced budget?
3 years.
Mr. Baylis.
Well, I'm certainly going to bring a more disciplined approach to managing the budget in Ottawa. And does that mean that I'm going to be cutting services or increasing taxes? No, there's a third way, and that is to augment our productivity. So as a business leader, I know how to increase productivity. I built a company with 2 people, myself and my mother, and we had 1,000 employees in the end. So I understand what needs to be done. I understand the private sector and I understand the public sector. I'm the only one here who understands both. Why? Because I have been an elected official, but I'm also a businessman. So I know how to implement government policy that is going to help us build up and grow our economy at an advanced rate.
Thank you. I think that we need to be realistic and direct with Canadians. And as a Liberal, I'm not comfortable to start with budget cuts. We need to talk about this $40 billion that was announced in the fall. It is our duty and our responsibility. We do have agreements with Indigenous people in this country, and we have commitments in the years to come. And I agree, we need to grow the economy. We want to increase productivity. But to think that we can do that in 3 years, well, I don't really think that that's realistic. And at this time, we're facing extreme threats from the U.S., so we have to be able to invest in our people, in our businesses, to protect them against the U.S.
I want to spend some time on this theme. It's very important. Mr. Carney, you spoke about the possibility of reducing transfers to provinces and to persons. Did you not?
No reduction in provincial transfers. No reduction in any initiatives. No, none. No increases, just status quo. Status quo, yeah. We have about 150 million in programs within the government budget. We have to increase productivity. We're in Montreal tonight, which is the center, a hub of AI that has to be put to work for the government. At the same time,
I'd like to add something. I'd like to add something.
Je veux juste dire, la responsabilité fiscale est importante, mais c'est important d'être clair
Yes,
avec les
it's
Canadiens.
important to get to a balanced budget, but we have to be clear and tell Canadians, explain that we are in a strong position today. What we need today is invest in productivity without cutting services that are helping Canadians directly.
I have other questions about
I
transfers
was the
later.
Minister for Service Canada. And when you have experience in governing, you know that we're already using AI to provide services, to make our services more efficient. We can always do more, but at a point in time where we need to support Canadians against economic threats, I don't agree in saying that we're not going to spend anything more. If we made this decision during the pandemic, if we had not made this decision, Canadians would have suffered more and businesses would have shuttered.
Yes or no to the next question. Was it a good idea to cut the GST quickly? Yes or no, Mr. Carney?
Yes. For the purchase of our first home.
That's exactly my plan. Yes, we
I think we agree on
that.
Yes, but from 5 to 4% because it helps all Canadians.
No, and I'll be honest with Canadians on that topic. We have to bring some discipline to Ottawa. It's easy to say, yes, we'll give you this and we'll give you that, but let's be clear. We do have a deficit and we have to address it. And we can't promise that we're going to cut the
Can I add one thing?
I want to conclude on this.
It's an important point, I think, because we're talking about investing in our countries. We're all talking about the same thing. For me, we have to use the power of the federal government to drive investment to transform our economy. We're in a crisis. We have to take action.
We have to be liberals. We need a liberal approach. Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin's party, we were always a party of budgetary responsibility and economic growth. We also need the support of Canadians. We can achieve both. We need to support Canadians and
So
be
we're moving on
disciplined.
to another theme, question 3. Well-educated labor, interested in the economic success, creation of jobs. How are you going to ensure that Canada has access to highly qualified labor? I know that it comes under provincial jurisdictions, and I come back to transfers. Will you maintain the transfers? I asked a question earlier whether you're going to increase them because of the economic situation right now, in particular what's going on with our American friends. And the people that I talked about in the public service in Quebec are worried right now and are hearing rumors that there will be a cut in transfers. Earlier you said no status quo, no risk that there would be any cut in transfers to provinces and persons. Mr. Baylis gets to speak first.
Concerning transfers, provincial transfers, no, that's not where we're going to cut. I want to grow the economy by investing so that we can increase our productivity as well. So we have to believe in ourselves. We have to invest in ourselves. And the thing that worries me is the fact that we've cornered our universities, we've squeezed them. It's not a good thing because it's fundamental to building up an advanced economy. So I'm against the cuts to university funding.
No cuts to transfers to the provinces. It's now time to increase talent and to train our workers. It's the right time to do that.
Oh mon Dieu. Madame Freeland.
Nous sommes des amis.
Well, we're friends. We're friends, but
Ils sont des amis aussi. Mais nous sommes
they're
des
friends
amis.
too.
Alors,
We are friends.
Non, ce n'est pas le moment de couper les
No, this is not the time to reduce transfers to the provinces. It's the right time to work more closely than ever with the provinces. And it's important to ask the provinces to work closely together. What I'm seeing among the provinces is a tremendous willingness today to unite as part of Team Canada, for us all to work together. We're ready to do that. And we can genuinely increase economic growth and prosperity for every single Canadian by creating free trade within our country. It is the right time to do it, and we can.
No, I would not cut any transfers to provinces or territories. I don't think it's the time to do that. And it's important to know that I would respect the jurisdiction of the provinces. But what we could do as a government would be to modernize our social safety net and make sure that EI, for example, has an increased amount of resources to provide training to our workers. So it would be to cooperate with provinces and territories to use the existing programs on the federal level and to make sure that people would have access to these services and these programs. We need to modernize our social safety net for the 21st century. There are too many for whom it doesn't work.
I'll follow up with the debate, and Madam Gould gets to answer the question for these last some months. Several specialists say that the elimination of barriers to trade between provinces and territories would contribute to favor economic growth in Canada. This is not a new idea. Time seems to be difficult to apply. And what would you do to make it work?
As you said, this is not a new idea. Every Prime Minister since Laurier has tried to do it. But I think that what's important to have would be to have dedicated working groups according to sectors to see what are the regulations that can be set aside while respecting the differences to work together. This is something that I've done with the National Daycare Plan in order to share best practices between provinces and also to see what are the strengths and the weaknesses and how we can do things. This is federal work to work together to find solutions, and this is how, what I would do, I would have frequent meetings with the Council of the Federation to make sure that this Team Canada approach would be strong.
Mr. Carney.
Well, yes, let's be clear. We need to increase our GDP by 5%. That's much more than the impact of Trump's tariffs. We have to reduce prices by 15% as well. We're facing an affordability crisis in Canada. How do we do that? First of all, we have to convene premiers, and the federal government has to lead the initiative. We have to scrap federal barriers. There are many of them, and I know that the government's already working on this. Thirdly, we need to have a meeting with no preconceptions. We have to scrap barriers which need to be torn down.
I think this is an extremely important issue. And Karina's right when she said that this is something we've been trying to do for a long time. But I think the time for it has really come because Canadians are smart. And everyone understands that we're facing an existential threat coming from Trump. So if Trump doesn't want free trade with us, it is clear that we need to have free trade within Canada. Canadians are ready. I'm very happy with the initiative by the Premier of Nova Scotia, who suggested a reciprocal approach among provinces. That is a very good first step. And we have to move fast because Mr. Trump is moving fast, so we have to move fast too, and we can. Canadians are ready.
Mr. Baylis.
It's a challenge. It's going to be difficult. And it's not enough to say, it's not reasonable to say we're just going to deal with it. So I have two projects that will help with this. First of all, is to establish two natural gas pipelines from Alberta to east. to diversify our markets. And secondly, I also the other project is to build a Trans-Canada high-energy power line. And that's how we're going to be able to
We're now moving on to another thing. We'll
abolish
talk about supporting the Canadian population. As you know, the pandemic hurt quite a bit. We had high inflation. We have an important lack of affordable housing, and the cost of the groceries keeps increasing. The whole cost of living is increasing. So as a Prime Minister, what would you do to help Canadians? Ms. Freeland speaks first.
Vous avez raison.
You're right. Life is too difficult for people, and Canadians are very concerned about the threat that Trump represents. I have a very concrete and specific plan to help people with affordability. I would begin by reducing taxes for the middle class. After that, I would limit credit card interest rates, and then I would add 100,000 daycare spots. Then I would ensure there was more affordable housing created. The most important thing we need to remember, however, is that Pierre Poilievre will cut and cut and cut. And that's why the conversation that we're having now is extremely important, because the Liberal Party is the only party that can grow the economy and support
Baylis,
Canadians at the same time.
Inflation caught us all off guard and hit our vulnerable segments of the population. So I have solutions for this. First of all, I want to bring a budget discipline to Ottawa, and the second thing is to increase our productivity. Through budget discipline, we will in fact allow the value of the Canadian dollar to increase and the value of goods to go down. And by increasing our productivity, we will have more money in our pockets. So that'll be a double effect. And things are going to cost less because our dollar will have a higher value, and we will have more spending power. So this is how we're going to deal with this cost of living issue. It's not through an isolated program here and there. We need a whole system approach.
Ms. Gould?
Thank you. What does it mean if we say we're going to have the strongest economy in the G7, if it does not work for Canadians, and if it's hard for them to pay their rent or to pay their groceries? We need to have an economy that supports Canadians and works for them. What does it mean? I'm going to cut the HST. This will be about $700 in savings. I have a housing plan to create more housing to help first-time home buyers to enter into the market and to make sure that we put an end to homelessness, because poverty is expensive in our country. And I want to modernize our social safety net to make sure that seniors, that people with a disability, people who have lost their job, have access to basic services, and that there is a guaranteed income.
Well, look, I'd like to add that I intend to cut taxes for middle-class families. As I've just said, as Ms. Freeland has just said, I'll cut GST on new homes. I would focus on investing in programs such as daycare that Pierre Poilievre intends to cut. He will cut them. He's the wrong person at the wrong time for the Canadian economy. As I've just mentioned, a strong Canadian economy will bring down prices. It's important to seize this opportunity to do that, and also we have to strengthen competitiveness in key sectors like broadband.
Little question here. How much does a grocery basket cost for the average family? For four people?
I'm not the one who deals with the shopping food shopping at the
200
house?
to 250 in Toronto. It's about 250. Yes, I've done grocery shopping.
According to two organizations, it's approximately...
I save more than my husband when I do the shopping.
It's $300 per week. That's the Canadian average.
If you'll allow me.
No debate on this. We have to be out here at 10, not at 11. So follow-up question with a 5-minute debate, and I'm starting with you, Mr. Baylis. Immigration is a crucial element of Canada's success over the last few years. The increase in the number of immigrants in Canada added pressure on the health system in Quebec, education, daycare services, and housing, of course. And it cost quite a bit in Quebec. We know about Mr. Legault's disputes with the federal government on that. We have some 450,000 immigrants in Canada, 200,000 in Quebec. How to find the proper balance in the immigration system in Canada?
First of all, I would like to say that immigration is a good thing. It's important for Canada. My parents were immigrants. My mother comes from Barbados and my father from Britain. And we have also immigrants from India in our family. Having said that, we do have to control the number of immigrants and especially for permanent residents and also for students. So we have to have a smart immigration system that we had before. So we should step back and reinstall that.
Mr. Carney, you said today that you're going to maintain the immigration thresholds while Quebec comes demanding to have them cut. So what do you plan on doing with immigration thresholds if you become Prime Minister?
First of all my grandparents were immigrants to Canada. But now, there's a housing crisis. We can absorb them, but there's been a huge hike in the number of immigrants across the country over the past few years. So we have to have a cap for some time so that we can rebalance the system.
This cap that you wanted, we'll have a little bit of a difficulty imagining what the cap should be.
Well, there will be difficulties. There were errors in the past. That's clear. I'm here proposing change. We need to resolve the issues, but it takes time.
It takes time. It takes daycare service, takes schools, housing.
Yeah, we have to invest in daycare as well.
Ms. Freeland.
I want to start by thanking Frank for what he just said. It's very important, and it was very well said, the contribution that immigrants make. Thank you. It's very important that we maintain Canada as a country that welcomes immigrants. But if we are to achieve that, we need to have enough social services and housing for the people we welcome and invite. So as Prime Minister, I would make sure there was a link between housing and immigration. And when that link is there, we can reach a balance that will be good for society and good for the economy. I'll conclude by saying that we need to use the talents of immigrants who are here. One aspect of that notion, seizing opportunity that the Trump crisis presents, is to recognize the qualifications that have been earned abroad. There are too many doctors driving cabs. We have to change that.
I'm the only one who hasn't spoken yet. I thought everyone had a turn. So on the question of immigration, we have to be honest with Canadians. The government was too ambitious with the immigration targets over the past few years. I think that everyone and the Liberal Party sees the importance and the value of immigration. My grandparents arrived here with $5 in their pocket, and now I'm a minister in the government. But we do have to have conversations with provinces and territories to understand what is the capacity. Well, if a province says we have too many, well, we need to have this dialogue to set targets. And if you'll allow me to end, What we haven't spoken about is temporary immigrants, international students, and temporary workers. This figure was very high, over 2 million people entering every year, and these conversations need to be had in order to know how many can we absorb so that everyone who arrives in Canada has the opportunity to succeed and to have a good life here.
Over to you.
We know that we're looking for a number. So, est-ce que Canada can take 100 immigrants per year? Of course. Can we have 100 million immigrants per year? Of course not. So, we have to find the figure that we can, and it's linked to our capacity for health services and housing. So we have to sit down with provinces to find what is this figure, so that we can come.
What we have to do is to try. We need to recognize that the law needs to be changed because we are a welcoming country for
You get 20
students.
seconds each, the two of you.
I would say very quickly that we can't allow the kinds of comments about immigrants that we're hearing coming out of the U.S. at the moment. We can't have that in Canada. It is very important that we say it because some people want us to say the same kinds of things. That's unacceptable.
20 seconds.
How much? 20 seconds, okay. Chrystia has drawn a link between immigration and the housing crisis. She's quite right. We have to build millions and millions of new homes here in Canada, and we have to strengthen our programs, like the Housing Accelerator Fund that works here in
Question
Quebec.
3 on this theme. The Canadian health system is facing huge challenges like the aging population, the lack of professionals, waiting lists that are quite long, in particular for surgery in Quebec. In Quebec, well, of course, is responsible for health, like other provinces, but it has all the same problems as well. Earlier, you said that there won't be any increase in transfers, but our health system, we're just talking about the health system in Quebec. Yet, if our health system needs more money in order to work properly, how will you not think of increased transfers? Because we need them now, Mr. Carney. Ms. Freeland starts off.
OK. Alors, je suis tellement d'accord que
I
notre
completely
système de
agree
santé est
that our healthcare system is extremely important to us. It's part of our Canadian identity, even. We need a good healthcare system. I must also say that I respect the jurisdiction of provinces and territories when it comes to health. I've had a number of conversations with provincial and territorial premiers who say that they manage the system. The federal government has already put in a great deal more funding. We need to talk about results with Canadians, and there's some specific things we need to do as well. I propose that we invite Canadian physicians working in the U.S. to come back.
And we can also tax them, right?
And, well, they'll pay the same taxes as everyone else.
No, les
I'm not going to give them a tax break.
Canadians want to come back to Canada because they understand that we're under threat, and they don't much like what President Trump is doing in the U.S.
So, I spent quite a bit of time working in the health sector myself, and I do have a plan for us. We are going to have the best health system in the world, yes, and it's doable. So, but we need to change our paradigm. Our system was geared towards emergency and acute care. But we need is a system that deals with chronic care. So what is that? Right now, there are two entryways for the health system. You either have a doctor or you have to go to emergency. And of course, I don't have to describe how things proceed in the emergency. So, and I think that it's important for us to train nurse practitioners that can work at home, visit people at home. And I think that we also have to broaden the scope, professional scope of pharmacists, so that they can have the. Yes, they're trained to do it, but they have a wide scope of.
To give them more, they've received more powers recently, but even more. Mr. Carney.
Well, first of all, we have to maintain provinces for the provinces, and we have to respect their jurisdiction, including Quebec's jurisdiction, of course. Secondly, we have to eliminate obstacles to nurses and physicians here in Canada. We should only have one Canadian economy, not 13 different ones. Thirdly, we have to build a healthcare system which is modern. We have to use, as Mr. Baylis mentioned, one single digital medical file across the country. It has to be a national file, and we have to increase the use of AI within the healthcare system. And as the federal government, we can work in cooperation with the provinces.
500 billion in the United States on artificial intelligence, and a lot in France as well. Not part of the debate, but there it is.
We have to invest. We have to increase our spending on AI.
Mr. Jobin, AI can't do everything.
We have to add physicians as well.
I agree. And Canada is very strong in AI. We have to leverage that. We have the capacity.
Well, it takes a lot of time. Chronometer. Madam Gould.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize that there are francophones outside of Quebec as well, and they need healthcare services in their provinces and territories. As you said, this is a provincial responsibility. So what can the federal government do? We can increase transfers, but it's the same taxpayer that wants to see results. And we want to make sure that the provinces are using the funds responsibly to have results for Canadians. I think that a lot of money was spent without seeing results, and it's not up to the government of Canada to have the results. It's for Canadians, because this is the money of Canadians. So for provinces and territories, they have to be honest with their citizens, with what they're doing. And I think that I want to have agreements with provinces and territories on mental health services. This is also important everywhere.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. Let's go to question 4. Auto robbery, which represents a big problem here in Montreal, and fentanyl is killing people in our communities. And some people are scared for their lives and their security in major cities. We see it here in Montreal and Toronto. A lot of violence in the streets almost every day. As Prime Minister, how would you find the balance between an obligation of fighting against criminality, that's the police, and the necessity to attack the underlying causes of criminality through help organizations, community organizations? Ms. Gould, you get the answer.
First of all, people need to feel safe in their houses, in their communities. This is crucial for us as Canadians, and in my community of Burlington, we've seen an increase in crime, as you mentioned, here in Montreal and in other parts of the country. As federal government, we need to make sure that we have laws that ensure that people who steal vehicles, but not just that, that they're in this supply chain, that they are responsible. We have businesses here in the Port of Montreal that are benefiting from vehicle theft and property theft. So we have to change the criminal code to make sure that our laws can be enforced, but also it's up to provinces, territories, and municipalities to make sure that their police forces have the necessary tools to protect the citizens.
Ms. Freeland.
I would begin by saying that I completely agree with Karina. Security and safety are paramount. You're quite right to put the question, because people today don't feel safe in their cars and often in their homes. And the Liberal Party needs to be very clear with Canadians. We will deliver. Now, how do we do that? We begin by working closely with all levels of government and police forces. We've done it in Brampton, and we've had results within a few months. We also have to more effectively control the border, including with the use of AI, because one of the reasons that there is so much car theft is that it's possible to export stolen vehicles. We need to spend money on that. The federal government is responsible for the border, and we have to control it more effectively.
Mr. Baylis.
We have problems, and it starts with homelessness and the lack of affordable housing, and that's what pushes people into criminal lifestyles.
Go ahead.
Si vous permettez de finir, là.
No, please allow me to finish.
Right what he's saying.
I'm not trying to blame people who have problems. We have to help them. But having said that, there are things that we can do. For example, Mr. Trump was talking about reinforcing the border. I wouldn't have given in to him on that. I would have said we also have a problem with the border, because there are a lot of illegal weapons that get through the border. So we should have a negotiation on that, and not just I'll give you whatever you want. Secondly, the government creates laws, and now there are all kinds of technologies that we can incorporate into our legislation so that our police can use this technology, so that they can update their fight against crime.
Wow. There needs to be a big change here. Mr. Bailey and my colleagues are right. We have to secure the border. That's the federal government's responsibility to do that. We have to invest in the police and surveillance. We have to work with the Americans on this, because most firearms come here from the U.S. Let me finish. We also have to strengthen the criminal code for violent crime, like domestic violence as well. We have to have a buyback program for firearms. Mr. Poilievre's against that. He's quite happy to see AR-15s on our streets here in Canada.
I agree with what Mr. Carney was saying, but when Mr. Baylis was speaking, what I wanted to say is that we can't blame people who are homeless for crime. That's not right. You said that crime was caused by homelessness. And I think that it's really important to be honest that these are criminal organizations. It's organized crime that is stealing vehicles, or that is breaking and entering into homes. The only solution for that is to reinforce our borders, our criminal code, to make sure that we try to end firearms entering into our country, but it's not right to equate homelessness with crime.
We're changing up a little bit. It's a follow-up question, followed by a 5-minute debate. In fact, I have two questions for you. Bill 96, adopted by the National Assembly of Quebec, modifies the Official Language Act, including an article affirming the existence of a Quebec Constitution. Are you ready to recognize such a Constitution and Quebec-specific character? Who wishes to attack that? Let me see who's supposed to. Well, it's Ms. Freeland who's up on this one first. On the Quebec Constitution, would you apply?
I'd like to begin by talking about French. I believe that it's extremely important to be clear that French is in decline in Quebec and across Canada. It's also very important to point out that, in my view, all Canadians understand that Mr. Trump is a threat to our country and our economy. He's also a threat to our identity, and our identity includes our bilingualism. It includes French. And for that reason, I think that now it is more important than ever that we respect and support French and support francophones across Canada, as well as anglophones in Quebec. I'll conclude in saying that when I was elected in 2013, my French was very weak.
I'm talking about a Quebec constitution.
I am ready to support French and bilingualism across Canada. That's very important.
Anybody else want to answer?
The Liberal Party is a party that upholds the Charter of Rights and Liberties of Canada. And as a Liberal and as a Prime Minister, my work will be to make sure that all Canadians throughout the country, in each province and territory, have access to their rights and freedoms. So whether Anglophones in Quebec or Francophones outside of Quebec, I recognize the importance of the French language here in Canada, but in my opinion, the Charter of Canada is the Charter of Canada.
Mr. Bailey.
First of all, I can't say if I agree or not because I haven't seen this charter. So I should read the document first to see what it contains, to see if I agree or not. Concerning Bill 96, it's discriminatory against young Francophones who want to learn English as a second language, who tell their parents, if I told parents, listen, you can't learn math, they would say, are you crazy? But if I tell them, you can't learn English, which is a business language, that doesn't make sense. So I'm against Bill 96 because I think it's discriminatory against young Francophones.
Mr. Carney, for or against?
Oh, Mr. Jobin, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional expert either.
Je suis pragmatiste. Okay? Je suis pragmatiste.
I am a progressive. There are major challenges facing the French language here in Quebec. We have to strengthen the French language, have to promote it. And now, Francophone institutions like French CBC are in danger. They're in danger because of Pierre Poilievre. He intends to abolish it. It's incredible. It's at the heart of our society, our Canadian society. And the Liberal Party of Canada will strengthen French CBC and English CBC as well.
Well, that's something I wanted to underscore, and thank you, Mr. Carney, for having brought it up. We can't allow Mr. Poilievre to become Prime Minister because he clearly said that he will attack CBC and Radio Canada, and Radio Canada and CBC share the same infrastructure, so it's a direct attack on our cultural institutions, and Pierre Poilievre is a real menace in that respect.
Yes, and I believe that this is a time when, as Liberals, we need to be united. The Liberal Party will always support Canadian culture, Francophone culture in Canada. We will all support Radio-Canada and CBC. This is a very important time for Canadians. Pierre Poilievre has been very clear. He wants to cut and cut and cut, and that is very dangerous to our identity and sovereignty.
Specific question about Quebec. What are you going to do with the law on laicity, which is against the rights that are guaranteed by the Charter? So Ms. Gould starts off.
Once again, the Liberal Party is the party that upholds the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So our work as a federal government and my work as a Prime Minister would be to defend the rights and freedoms of each Canadian. And Quebecers themselves have brought this to the Supreme Court, and they are fighting against this law. As a government, I will support them to make sure that each Canadian in this country will have access to their rights and freedoms.
I would like to add, very well said, Karina. I completely agree. Our party is the party of the Charter, and as Prime Minister, I will always, always uphold the Charter. I believe that this is not the time for us to have divisions and conflicts within our country. What I'm feeling within conversations is that Canadians are more united than ever, united in the idea that we're a bilingual country, that we will support Francophones across Canada, linguistic minorities,
Mr. Carney,
anywhere
on
they are,
secularism?
and we're
Well,
united.
look, I wholeheartedly agree with what Karina said, but I'd like to add the following, as Chrystia has just said. Now we're facing a situation where we're under attack. Our values are under attack by the Americans. And therefore, we need reasonable accommodation. I respect secularism here in Quebec. I respect that. But that's possible in Canada. It's not possible in the U.S.
20 seconds.
It's an important thing. I've been fighting against this bill ever since it's been implemented. So there was a young Muslim woman, and her parents said that she was doing a good job. She didn't have any problems. Her only crime is that she was wearing a hijab, and we removed her from our employment. So let's be 100% clear. This is a discriminatory law, and the cost that we had to pay for the trial, it's our group that gathers the funds to fund her trial case. So I'm set against this law.
Team number 4, climate change. It's real, and it's a real threat. We've seen the fires and other extreme meteorological events. The leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, wants to cease attacking climate change. The carbon tax, he wants to axe it. What do you do with the carbon tax, Ms. Freeland?
I will eliminate the carbon tax on consumers, and I will do that as part of a larger climate plan that will continue to fight climate change. There's something important that has to be said tonight. We need to recognize and thank Prime Minister Trudeau for what he's done on climate. He is the first leader in Canada's history to put in place a climate action plan. And today, for the very first time, we are seeing economic growth while emissions go down. We have to continue on that track, respect the position of people who say they don't want to be taxed directly, and continue with the climate incentives that I set up as Finance Minister for the green industrial transition that creates jobs and attracts investment.
On the carbon tax.
I would implement a climate policy that would have a tangible and direct impact on the environment based on the recognized model of the polluter pays. The system that we have right now doesn't work. We'll implement a system that does work, where everybody contributes, individuals and industry alike. Of course, there's a cost to collecting waste. There's a cost to water treatment and for pure air. And people who say that we can do that without a cost are not honest about it. So right now, the carbon tax doesn't really deal with the issue. I would like to reinvest the funds in programs and Canadian businesses that will implement real changes to the climate situation.
Ms. Gould.
I'm not
going to abandon the fight against climate change. I'm not going to concede on the carbon tax. I promised that I would cancel the increase that was set for April the 1st, but we need to be honest with Canadians. It's a price on pollution, and this represents 10 to 15% of the reduction in our emissions, and that's a lot of what we're doing. And as a mother with 2 children, I cannot allow the planet to burn. I have to do my share to make sure that we can have clean water and clean air. And when Canadians say that they don't agree with the price on pollution, it's really a question of affordability right now. So we need to deal with affordability, and then we need
Mr. Carney,
to do something with climate
Well,
change.
first of all, I've devoted most of my career to fighting climate change. Recently, as the UN Special Envoy, we're in Montreal. Montreal was where the protocol was signed, where the COP15 was held as well. We know that it's a duty for Quebec and Canada to deal with climate change. That's the Canada I know. Secondly, we're in Montreal, which is the headquarters of Hydro-Quebec. It's an economic imperative for Canada and Quebec. It's an economic imperative to reduce greenhouse gases so that we can have clean manufacturing, so that we can have clean infrastructure, so that we can have good jobs and export abroad as well. And we have to have a better trade relationship with the EU.
But Mark, what would you do about the carbon tax?
I'll be cancelling it on consumers and small and medium businesses and farms, and I'll replace it with a system where big polluters pay and households won't pay.
We agree. And I'd like to say something very quickly. It's very important for us as a political party to listen to Canadians, and Canadians have been very clear. We have to win against Pierre Poilievre, and with Pierre Poilievre, we lose everything.
So we now have a 5-minute debate, and Mr. Carney will answer the question that I'll put to you. I said that there was people from the party that sent in some of the questions, and Stéphane from Quebec answers to the survey. It says, with the acceleration of climate change that opens up new commercial routes in the Arctic, it might be the next world of geopolitical. How would your leadership reinforce the sea sovereignty and security of Canada in the face of the new issues with military bases, submarines, etc.? How we're preparing for the threat to the Arctic?
Was that a young Liberal who asked that question? Stéphane, it's a very good question. It's one of the greatest risks for our country. We have to strengthen the security in the Arctic. Everyone knows this. I was born in the Arctic, in the Northwest Territories. I know it well. So we need to have at least 2 military bases in the Arctic region. But how do we do that? That's the difference between us, between the Liberal Party and Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre takes a flight to Nunavut like an emperor, and he says, we're going to build a base here. And he comes back to Ottawa, to his mansion in Ottawa. I've had conversations with the Premier of Nunavut. We're talking about building a base, the possibility of securing the Arctic, while at the same time increasing the prosperity of people in Nunavut, including Inuit, of course. We have to cooperate and work with them.
Well, we have to do it pretty quickly because the ice is melting.
But it's Canada, isn't it? We don't have emperors here.
One thing that I totally agree with, that we do need military bases in the north, and we need to do this in cooperation with Indigenous peoples and the Northwest Territories. But a difference that we have is that you don't want to reach the 2% NATO spending until 2030. No, not you. And if we're going to protect the Arctic, our borders, our sovereignty, we need to invest more quickly. I have 2 ways of doing it. First of all, by increasing the salaries of members of the armed forces. We don't pay our soldiers enough, and we can do military purchasing in a better way. We need to fast-track this to make sure that we're able to protect the Arctic.
Mr. Baylis.
So if you go on my website, you'll see my program for Canada's defense, and it's clearly laid out that we have to protect the Northern Passage. It's a national priority to protect the Arctic. And as Madame Gould underscored, we have to pay our military better. Now, we are going to invest. We have to invest 2% of our GDP for defense, but we have to do it intelligently to protect the North. And that's how we're going to meet this challenge.
Ms. Freeland.
Stéphane, thank you for the question. It's so important. The reality is that today we can no longer rely on the United States to defend us, because now it's the U.S. president who is threatening our sovereignty. So we need a new approach to national security and defense, and it has to begin with the Arctic, the North. We have to work very closely with our northern allies, including Denmark, which is also being threatened. We have to work with our European allies who have nuclear defense capabilities, France and the UK, and we need to invest in our own defense. I agree with Karina. I do believe we need to invest the full 2% by 2027. But I wouldn't send those checks to the U.S. industrial military complex. I want to invest in Canadian companies.
And it's 30 seconds only because we're almost through. 30 seconds.
I will respect the time. I'd like to add the following. 80% of each dollar goes to the U.S., a country which is threatening us. And this is the reason why I've said that we have to increase defense spending by the end of the decade. We can do it more quickly, of course, but we have to invest here in Canada.
So let's talk about energy here in Canada. New pipelines might be necessary. I know we're sending oil to the United States. There was also talk about an east-west pipeline that Quebec refused. So what do we do? If the idea of implementing comes back, you said two things, Mr. Carney. You said we'll never impose a pipeline to Quebec, but you also said it could be possible to use the federal government's power, including emergency powers, to accelerate projects that our economy needs. So what does that mean? It can't go through all of Canada and not go through Quebec. Quebec says, no, how are you going to manage that?
Pretty simple, really. A project like Energy East is possible. It's a fact. It's possible to build an oil pipeline from Quebec to the Maritimes, from Alberta to displace our oil exports to the U.S. 70% of our oil comes from the U.S. today. Our neighbor, no longer our friend, of course. I think it's an opportunity for us that we should seize. Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan have to agree, they have to buy in.
But Quebec right now, because it's Trump that's threatening, but maybe Quebec will say now that Trump is threatening.
Well, that's a possibility. Yes. Everything's changed. It's quite possible that they now say yes. A final point, the federal government has to act quickly and rigorously to support a project like Energy East if it's in the interest of the whole country.
Ms. Freeland.
We need to do two things. We have to diversify our exports, And we've already done that with energy infrastructure. That's a good thing, and we have to continue. We also have to be more resilient with homegrown energy. In the riding I represent, people are heating their homes with natural gas that comes through a pipeline going to the US. That position is dangerous for us, and we have to do something about it. We have to change that.
Ms. Gould?
Thank you. Energetic security has become a very important issue for Canada. I'm not sure if it's a pipeline or if it's a discussion on refining our resources here in Canada, but it's a conversation that we need to have. We need to have this conversation while respecting provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples. We need to protect our energetic security. We need to see how we can go forward with the resources that we have, and also we need to fight against climate change. I'd also like to say that I know for people here in Quebec, but also throughout the country, the cost of gas is something that concerns them greatly. So how can we work together to protect our energetic security, protect our economy, our sovereignty, and ensure a better
Mr. Baylis, what's your opinion?
Well, it's time to have an honest discussion with Quebecers. We can the three ways of transporting oil. We can transport it by boat, pipeline, or train. Now, when it comes to shipping, just imagine if there was an accident on the Maritime Seaway, St. Lawrence Seaway. It would be an ecological catastrophe. And then concerning rail transport, remember what happened in Mégantic. So I've already announced that we're going to put into place 2 gas pipelines, one to bring natural gas from Alberta towards the eastern Canada, and the other one to take natural gas towards the west of Canada. It would diversify our markets, it would be good for Canada, and it would also be good for the environment, because it would give the European markets to replace oil and coal with natural gas.
May I add something quickly? I want to thank Karina for mentioning Indigenous people.
Well, First Nations have to be involved in this. What would be your approach with them? If Quebec says no, maybe the First Nations, they're now partners and they have thought. We have to consult them.
Thank you, Karina. And, of course, the participation of Indigenous people in our energy projects are extremely important. As Minister of Finance, I created a $5 billion program to make it possible for Indigenous communities to take part in the projects and to create greater prosperity for Indigenous communities. This is a start, but Canada must continue to include Indigenous people in our major natural resource projects. It boosts prosperity and reconciliation.
It's 9:47. I still have a few questions. If we have time, I can come back and we can talk about this again. The government, Trudeau, announces that it'll go forward with a project of $10 million for a high-speed train between Quebec and Toronto. These major investments might give positive both investment results and climate results. So what's your vision for this project? Is it to be financed essentially by the government? Is it a public project? Is it a private project? Is it a PPP? What should be done with this project that Mr. Trudeau is launching and Mr. Carney has the first word?
Mr. Trudeau announced the TGV this week. He didn't consult me. I don't have the figures. But it is an interesting project. It's very important for our economy in terms of how we fund this project. It's clear that there has to be public and private funding. It's clear that the federal government has committed to invest about $4 billion over the next decade to prepare for the project. Now, if the project is the right one, if it's viable, well, quite probably the government will support the project.
J'appuie le projet complètement. C'est un projet qui est bon.
I fully support the project. It's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's even good for housing. Because if we have a high-speed rail, that makes it possible for people not to all live in major cities. We need a responsible approach. And a responsible budget means we need to have the funds and use the funds we need to build our country, to boost economic prosperity.
Yes, I support the program. I think it's an excellent idea for two reasons. First of all, it's good for the environment, that's clear, but it's also good for the economy. Why? Because it's going to encourage new links. It's been demonstrated by studies in Europe that with the high-speed train, university professors and business women can travel about much more freely. So it's very good for the economy.
I agree. I think that everyone is in agreement. I've been working on this project for about 10 years. I'm very pleased to see that it's going ahead for all the reasons that my colleagues have stated. But I'd like to highlight that I'd like for us to talk about reconciliation more. And that's why I raised this subject. This is a fundamental issue for the future of our country, and we cannot go forward without partnerships, without the inclusion, without listening to the voices, the ideas, and also the leadership of Indigenous peoples here in Canada. And I think that it is very important thing of the Trudeau government. We have done more, and I would not
we have some 3
abandon
minutes
the Indigenous
before your
peoples.
closing statements. So, questions. At what point would you drop the writ? I can answer quickly. It
Yes, I can
depends
answer. It
where Canada is at
where
that point in
Canada
time.
is at that
If
time.
we're in
If
a
we
tariff
are
war
in
with the
a
United
tariff,
States,
war
then we'll have
with
to
the
see
US, we'll have
what
to
the
see
best
what is the
option is
best
for
option
Canada.
for Canada.
Mr. Carney now.
Exactly.
We should never take a decision until we have to.
Before you have to make that decision. I agree with what Ms. Gould has said.
sondages, mais M. Trump ne cesse de dire ça me tente plus de parler avec Trudeau parce qu'il n'y a plus de pouvoir.
So we don't want to talk to Trudeau because he doesn't have any power. We want to talk to someone else who's going to be an elected representative.
Yes.
Well, there has to be a government with a clear mandate and a strong mandate at that. It's better to have a Liberal government. Much better. Mr. Jobin, if you allow, there are circumstances, probably not the most probable circumstances, that things might happen. Things might happen by the middle of March. We'll make a decision accordingly.
I've been elected 4 times. I have a seat in the House of Commons. So as Prime Minister, I would have choices to make, and I would make my choice not on the basis of what the polls say, but on the basis of what's best for the national interest. If on March 10th we're in an economic war with the US, I would talk to provincial and territorial premiers, I would talk to the unions, I would talk to business people, and we would together decide whether Canada should go to an election or keep a stable government. And given the fact that I have a seat in the House of Commons, I would be able to make that decision and decide what is best for
30
Canada.
seconds for Mr. Baylis, because then it'll be your closing statements.
Well, with the threat, of President Trump, it's essential that we have a stable government in place. The problem, of course, is that M. Poilievre is putting his personal ambitions ahead of national interest. So if it was possible to reach an agreement with Mr. Poilievre and say, listen, we need to be strong and united right now so that we can defend ourselves against Trump, that would be wonderful. But if he doesn't want to play along and he puts his own interest ahead of Canada, he's going to force our hand.
Time's out. Time's up. Mr. Baylis, you have 90 seconds for your closing statement. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, Canada is a country of wide spaces and broad ideas. We're going to have a strong and resilient economy for the benefit of all Canadians. We will have a better health system, in fact, the best health system in the world if we follow my plan, and we'll reestablish the confidence in the federal government when it comes to the delivery of services. And yes, we are going to stand up to President Trump. But let me underscore something that hasn't been said up until now, and it's important for me to do so. The French language and French culture is part of my personal identity. So Quebecers, Acadians, Franco-Ontarians, Franco-Manitobans, and Métis, I want you to understand that I am an ally for you in Ottawa. I will not only fight to protect but promote French language and culture across the country. We will have a Canada that is proud and prosperous. This is the future that I want to build with you. So let's be courageous, let's be audacious, let us aspire to a Canada that we can all be proud of. My name is Frank Baylis, and I am asking for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baylis. 90 seconds for you, Ms. Gould.
Thank you. This evening, you've listened to a debate of ideas on a vision for the country. The reality is that we're not going to be conservatives light to win the elections. We're going to stay true to liberal values. We're going to fight for Canada. And to do that, we need policies for today and for the future. Not the same old, outdated political ideas from the 80s and 90s. You've heard my vision for Canada, to face today's problems, and we will be confronted with different ones tomorrow. We need new leaders who will fight for Canadians, a leader who understands what people are experiencing and who works each and every day to improve their lives, a leader who is able to stand up to bullies, a leader who will not back down. Canada is the best country in the world to have a family, to build a business, and one's future. We are a nation of creators, of innovators, of dreamers. That is where opportunities, empathy, and progress works hand in hand. I am the candidate for the future, and this future starts now.
Thank you. Mr. Carney now.
Members of the Liberal Party, Canadians, across the country, you've told me that you're concerned. You're worried about the future. You've told me that you want positive change. You're looking for a leader who can unite us. You want a plan to defend Canada, and that creates opportunities for all. I'm up for that task. I'm not a politician, a career politician. That's true. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a person of action. And when I see an issue, a problem, I want to solve it. Throughout my career, I've managed many economic crises. I've built strong economies, and I've gone through tough negotiations, and I've succeeded. That allows me to have the necessary experience to lead Canada through this turning point in the history of our country. I love our country. Canada has given everything to me, my family, my education, my values. I'm ready to give my all for Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Ms. Freeland?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jobin. Thank you, dear colleagues, for an excellent conversation. Tonight, it's clear that we are strong. We, the Liberals, are strong and united. We agree on a lot of things. Canadians today are coming together to defend our country. Restaurants are removing American wines from the menu. Snowbirds aren't going to Florida this winter. Our country is strong, intelligent, and united. I'm very grateful to be here tonight with 3 other Liberals who love Canada and to address the 400,000 Liberals who love our country as well. Pierre Poilievre agrees with Trump. They both say that Canada is broken. We know it's not. Canada and Canadians are more united than ever. Let's use that passion to make our wonderful country even stronger and more prosperous. Tonight, let's make a commitment to fight for Canada. All 4 of us, all Liberals, all Canadians. Together, we will win.
Thank you, Ms. Freeland. Thank all of you for your presence this evening and having respected the rules. Everything went pretty well, and this is the end, therefore, of this debate for the leadership of the Liberal Party, the French. My colleague will be the animator tomorrow, and the election will be held on the 9th of March coming up. Thank you very much for having been with us. Do you think that Donald Trump followed the debate this evening? Not the French debate.
Not in French.
Maybe tomorrow.
He knows who I am.
Thank you all. Good luck to each of you. There's a few weeks of campaign within the party left. Have a good evening. Thank you, everybody, for having been there. Goodbye.
And that was the Liberal Party leadership debate, the French debate, happening tonight with the English debate set by tomorrow. That, of course, was moderated by former TVA Quebec anchor Pierre Jobin. I'm David Cochrane. This is a late edition of Power and Politics. I'm here with the CBC chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton, and we've got our panel of analysts for this debate night. Jonathan Baylis, former Quebec advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Emily Nicolas, a columnist for Le Devoir. Vanda Nakata, a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Caroline Varayan, a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. So I agree. We heard that a lot in the debate tonight. It was mostly very polite, no vast policy pronouncements, I think, outside of what was within the range of Liberal policy positions. The moderator thought quite forceful in his questioning and pressing people. So I have 5 questions I want to kind of just throw to the panel for quick answers before we do a deeper dive on this. And the candidates are going to come out and scrum in a little bit, and we'll be taking that live. So let's start. Jonathan, I want to start with you first. Marc Carney's French, was it good enough for Quebecers, and is it good enough to handle Pierre Poilievre and Yves-François Blanchet in a debate?
It needs work. It's not there yet. It was at times good, and at times it was a challenge to understand what he was saying.
Emily, is that your view as well?
When it comes to a debate with Yves-François Blanchet, that's when it would be in trouble. If you're debating other Anglophones, then it's fine. But if you're debating Yves-François Blanchet, which is the real task for a Quebec campaign,
right.
He's going to need to get better. But he's not hopeless. This is not a debate in which Marc Carney's French has made him lose the position that he had in terms of being ahead.
Okay.
Nothing of the sort happened right now.
Okay, Rosie, your thoughts?
Yeah, ditto with all of that. But I would also say at times seem to struggle to understand the question fully, which I think is more problematic for me. But this was not career-ending, but it was certainly a signal that it's got to get better.
And couldn't finish his answers in time sometimes. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on those questions?
Yeah, he didn't seem super comfortable in everything. I found other candidates like Karina Gould able to pull out stories, and that was natural to them, and drive a human element to it. But he was able to answer the question at times. I noticed he struggled with finding the next word that he needed.
Okay.
In a general election, they need to focus 75% of their debate prep time on French and on dealing with somebody as charismatic and skilled at debating as Blanchet.
Okay.
Can I just say, though, the one thing that he did do is that he referenced Quebec often.
Yeah.
Quebec culture, Quebec language, Quebec industries. He did that perhaps more than anyone else. And I think that that'll go a long way to appeasing some people who may think his French isn't quite there yet.
Okay, Rosie, I'll stay with you for my next one. Did Chrystia Freeland do anything to push through from her position as probably second place right now?
I don't think so. I don't think she needed to. I don't think she got where she needed to tonight. Maybe something will change tomorrow. And I'll say something else. I think she was a little too cozy with Mark Carney. There was a little too much violent agreement between her and him. And that's not what she needs right now. I understand it's difficult. We talked about all that at the beginning, attacking your colleague and another Liberal. But I think tomorrow she's going to have to be a little sharper.
Vandana?
I agree. I think she didn't pull through. I think, again, the agreement made her look like, and I talked earlier about how debates are hard for women, she looked like the second in command, not the first in command, not the leader in charge. And I felt she wasn't able to differentiate herself. And I found some of her communications, things that people complain about in English, also existed in French.
Carlene?
Her answers were, to me, the most thoughtful and intelligently composed. That's often been a characteristic of her as a politician, at least in my view. But I would like to see her give a little bit more assertiveness in the English debate tomorrow and not be afraid to go on the attack.
Emily, what is your assessment of Chrystia Freeland tonight?
I think she did one thing differently than she used to do, and that is better. That is that she's now able to acknowledge that Canadians are struggling. When she was Minister of Finance, there was a lot of, but we're doing better than other G7 20s in a way that would go over people's heads. And I think she's been able to do that a little bit better tonight. That isn't enough to make her move, I think, in the polls in terms of where she is in the leadership race. But I'm noticing this because it was, to me, one of her greatest communication challenges, that she was sounding like she was lacking empathy sometimes in terms of people struggling with the cost of living.
Jonathan, your thoughts?
I think, well, Rosie wondered what Unleashed Chrystia looked like. I don't know after having watched this, what was Unleashed. She was friendly with Carney. In fact, I think she cleaned up a couple of his French gaffes. I found her also very friendly with Karina. So I don't know how that fits in with the Unleashed Chrystia. She's going to have to find a way to define herself to stand out tomorrow night.
Okay, Carlene, let's start with you on this one. I want to ask about Karina Gould. Was she the most natural politician on that stage?
Yes.
It seemed she had a good performance overall. It seemed.
Very strong performance. I think she was the best performer of the debate.
Vandana?
100% agree. She, again, human stories, very comfortable, very off the cuff. Was able to debate on something she disagreed with. I think she did the best.
She was also the one who actually went first and most often in engaging with the other candidates.
Yep, and went into debate.
Yeah, exactly.
That mic we're showing is for a reason. That's what the candidates are going to come out and speak. Frank Baylis, I believe, will be the first person to come out. Rosie, Karina Gould, she struck me. She just very natural political chops. You saw her House leader experience there.
Yeah, she was also very calm. She was very confident in what she was saying. And I would say, like, compared to some of the other candidates, she does have points of differentiation, right? The carbon tax, she's going to keep it. Now, maybe that's not a great idea, but it's an idea that she has. And she had a couple of those, and I thought was able to make that contrast pretty well. I think, though, if the choice is we need to find someone to take on Donald Trump, I'm not sure she presented that part tonight, and maybe needs to do a little bit more on that tomorrow.
All right. Okay, Jonathan, your thoughts on Karina Gould's performance?
I think both those points, the be able to take on Donald Trump, it may be the thing that is a challenge for her, but the most natural, gifted politician, yes. And you saw that, her and Freeland to an extent, but she was even better in terms of, they're used to question period. When you have X amount of time, you know exactly how much time you have, you know who you're responding to, there's a give and take, and there's a natural progression to it. She clearly felt comfortable in that milieu.
Emily, on Karina Gould.
It was a great decision for her to run for leadership. She's unlikely to win at this point if we see what the polls are. But I think that she's better off having ran, and that everybody will know her better and seriously take her potential as well in the future. It will help her future political career, just the fact that she has had this presence here in French. And that Quebecers will get to know her better as well.
Yeah, for what it's worth, people I've seen ranked Baylis is best at French, then Gould second, then Freeland, and then Mark Carney. That would be a fair assessment. All right, that is not my 100%. Ranking because I have no capacity. Vandana, Frank Baylis, did he make an impression in this debate and breakthrough? He's the least known, What are your thoughts?
He's known also from Quebec, and I think there's two things he brought up that I find that I've been frustrated with politicians on because they speak around it, and it's Bill 21 and on the Middle East. And I think he had clear views, polarizing views for some, but clearer views. He talked about more of a robust plan for the Palestinian people. He talked about Bill 21. He talked about discriminating. Now, that won't be necessarily popular across Quebec.
Sure.
But maybe he felt more comfortable with that as a Quebecer, saying those things. So I think that was it. Is it enough for him to carry over somewhere? No. But is it something that he was able to stand out? Sure.
He gave a clear answer, for sure. He took a clear position. 100%. Carly, your thoughts on Frank Baylis' performance tonight?
His answer to the really core Quebec-directed questions on Bill 21 and on the question of the French Constitution, I mean, he kind of ran circles around the other candidates simply in his willingness to take the question on head on, while the others sort of squirmed and tried to find a way to say something without saying anything. So in that capacity, he out-Quebec'd everybody. But other than that, I don't know that he's a name that we'll necessarily remember when this race is over.
Rosie, your thoughts there?
Yeah, but his French is great. It's conversational. That's the French that you're talking when you're in a bar having a drink with someone, and that's where he had an advantage. I don't know what his advantage will be tomorrow, is what I would say.
Interesting. Okay, Jonathan, your thoughts on Frank Baylis?
I think he's an outlier. He's he has picked this one point on Palestinian state recognition where he has a very weak inability to articulate why. He has decided that that's his winning policy position. The rest of his policy positions aren't very deep, and you see when he's forced by Karina at one point to articulate a bit more about why homeless people are the cause of crime. That's actually what he said. She came at him, and he had no way out of it. There's not much depth to the majority of his policy issues. He's found a few pet projects, and that seems to be his focus. And on the Quebec issues, on Bill 21, yes, he out-Quebec'd everyone by talking about issues, but he talked about it in a way that will probably alienate a lot of Quebec voters.
Emily, final thoughts there on Frank Baylis?
There's a lot of his policy ideas that are more out there and that he was trying to explain in like 15 seconds.
Right.
And so for me as a listener, it's hard to understand what he actually meant by some of those things. And so I think that if you listen carefully, that's perhaps one of the things that you're left with, is that if you're trying to think outside of the box, but do it in 50 seconds, then you might end up sounding like, I don't know where you're actually getting with this. So there was a little bit of that for sure with Frank Baylis.
Okay, we talked about Mark Carney's French, and it is the consensus view is that it was the weakest of the four candidates on the stage. There was a moment when they were talking about Israel, Gaza, and what you might do there, where he had a slip up in his second language that the Conservatives already jumped on social media. I want to play this clip, and we're going to quickly talk about it on the other side.
When I say that we should recognize a Palestinian state, it has nothing to do with Hamas. It has to do with the population. We want to help them rebuild. So I'm not proposing for one moment that we'll work with Hamas.
We all agree on Hamas, on a two-state
No, we don't agree with
solution.
Hamas. No, we're against
Yes,
Hamas,
we're all against
absolutely.
Hamas, we are. And we're in favor of a two-state solution.
Okay, the translation, Rosie, kind of cleaned it up a little bit there, right? Because the translator said we agree on Hamas. What Mark Carney said, we agree with Hamas. A slip of the tongue, but it's been jumped on.
Chrystia Freeland cleaned it up for him, which is very kind. I'm not sure I would do that in our leadership race. I might have let him just dangle a little bit longer.
But the translator in that clip said on Hamas.
Listen, it was clearly a mistake. He clearly meant to say we are all on the same page against Hamas, or we all agree with our position on Hamas. Whatever it is. But the problem is not the mistake. The problem is what happens if you have a leader who is able to make that mistake on an issue that is that delicate, that sensitive, that could cause you all kinds of problems at a world leaders meeting where you say something and you don't have Chrystia Freeland beside you to clean it up. So it will be an attack ad, 100% it will be.
It's already
as soon as he said it, I knew that it was coming. And that's the reality of politics. And that's what Mr. Carney's learning is a tiny mistake a linguistic mistake is going to cause some damage here.
Yep, and Emily, Rosie took me exactly to the point where I wanted to go on this, is that the question of, you said it's not career-ending, not fatal, his French, but when you can make a mistake like that in a moment like this, and it's immediately seized upon, there's word-for-word quotes, conservative tweets all saying essentially the same thing. How does that play with French Canadians, with Quebecers, as opposed to the mostly English critics that are jumping on it tonight?
That's the irony of it, right? Is that the conservative attack ads are a world that mostly function in English.
Okay, sorry, Emily. Emily, I'm going to come back to you. Frank Baylis is at the microphone. Sorry to interrupt you, but hold that thought. We're going to listen to Frank Baylis.
The recognition of a Palestinian state. When you heard Mr. Carney today trip on his French and say that Canada agrees with Hamas, what did that say to you, and what do you think Liberals understood from that? I'm sure that Mr. Carney just stumbled on his French, so I don't really attach any importance to that. I'm 100% convinced that Mr. Carney is against Hamas.
There's no question that sometimes myself, we all get tripped up in different second language or third languages and that. I'm absolutely certain Mr. Carney did not mean to say he supported Hamas in any way and that he's completely against Hamas. But I will let him. I'm sure you're going to ask him that when he comes up here. But you asked me the question. I don't take anything from that. I think he just made a mistake. That's all.
As a follow-up now, do you think that Mr. Carney has a level of French which is sufficient if he wins the leadership race to debate Mr. Poilievre in French, or Mr. Blanchet as well from the Bloc? I think that all candidates, including myself, are excellent. I'm very proud to see all the candidates running for the leadership. For me, they're all excellent. I'd be very pleased if I won, but I wouldn't be unhappy if another one won either. Another question now. Hello, Mr. Baylis. Maurice Proulx from Le Devoir. Hello. The federal government announced recently the TGV project between Quebec City and Toronto to the cost at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars. Is this a good project? Well, I'll have to look at the detail. I'll have to look at the cost benefit. What's really important is the implementation phase. I can't really tell you how much it'll cost because that's something we'll have to look at, but it's something that's worth looking at nevertheless. Do you think that this will actually happen? Oh, I hope it will. I hope it will end up being built with a reasonable budget. Yes, I do. It will be good for Canada, I think. Any other questions?
Good evening, Mr. Baylis. A couple of times during the debate, you mentioned Bill 96 and the secularism law, and outrightly said that the two laws were discriminatory. Given the reception of that characterization of the laws during the last federal election debate, how do you feel about being so blunt about that description?
I don't think I'm blunt. I'm someone that's always stood up for human rights. So Bill 96, it's not well known, but now that I've got you as an audience and you're locked here with me, my mother fought the first case of racial discrimination in Canada based on employment. She was a young black lady that was denied a job. She fought that company, and she ultimately won after a 12-year court case. But she established in Canada that you're not allowed to discriminate based on race. A young black woman. Today, we have a young Muslim woman, and her only crime is to lose her job because she wears a hijab. It's completely unacceptable. That's why I've been co-president to Non à la Loi 21 since we founded it, and we've been fighting this law from the very beginning. And I'll also say we've been collecting money to help with the court fees because there's court fees involved, and I am part of that process, and I'm also donating my own money. So it's very important to me. With respect to Bill 96, I think that what it's hurting most of all is the young Francophones who are denied the right to learn a second language of English, which is a language of business. So they're actually hurting the young Quebecers. They're hurting our economy here in Quebec. So I'm against Bill 96 in its present form. I am 100% for, and I said it clearly, helping and promoting the French language and culture, not just here in Quebec where it's centered and it's strongest and it's most important, but right across the country. So I want to make that clear. Though I'm against Bill 96, I'm 100% for positive, proactive measures to support the language and culture in Quebec. Merci.
Baylis est un petit peu plus grand que les autres candidats.
Okay.
He's bigger than the other candidates. Another question now.
I wanted to ask, what was the most important message that you wanted to portray to Canadians tonight? And do you think you were successful in getting that point across?
That's a good question. I think the most important message I would like to convey is that I'm the only person that has the experience in both the business world and in the political world. I've been elected and I've been a person that's created jobs. So this gives me a unique perspective to how to make our economy run. I know what governments can do to help businesses, can help the economy, but I also know when they do mistakes and they get in the way of the economy. So I think that's one of my greatest strengths. And I added to that, I would say this, that whether we like it or not, Mr. Trump has chosen he's been chosen by the American people. He is a very aggressive, almost bully business person. And he's made more than half his cabinet business people. I'm one of the most successful business people that's ever presented himself to be in politics, and I'm bringing that skill set with me. That's why I pointed out that I was able to write before his inauguration that he's not going to put 25% tariffs on everything, that I could also predict where he's going to put them. And I put this in my letter the day before, that the first place he's going to hit is steel. I can see where he's coming, and that way I can prepare ourselves to counterattack. My colleagues, and they're all well-meaning, that say they want to negotiate again, there's no negotiations. We have a deal in place. We have the negotiation that he himself negotiated, CUSMA, or he calls it USMCA. He signed it. So we don't need a third deal. We need to respect the deal we have. And we need to understand that's the problem. So I'm going to be driving ourselves to stiffen our backs. We are going to hold our strength against him, and we will win in the long run. I have no doubt about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prochaine question.
Next question. Hello. You've said there's too much red tape and you want to increase productivity. Do you intend to reduce the number of public servants, and how many will you cut? I've never said there was too much red tape. I didn't say that. I did say that I'd like to modernize the government. When you take a smart approach, you know, sometimes people say, well, let's cut 10% across the board. That doesn't work. If I'm Prime Minister, I'll ask all members of the cabinet to look at their departments to see where they need more people, more technology, new procedures. Perhaps you need more people here and fewer people over there. I've never said that we would cut the bureaucracy. I think we have a great bureaucracy in Canada.
Bonjour, Marianne Despelteaux de
Franco Press. Earlier, you talked about budgetary discipline, fiscal discipline, and restoring it in Ottawa. Francophones in a minority setting need more money for education and health. Do you think that fiscal discipline could have an impact on transfers in education and health? No, not at all. As I said in my closing remarks, language and culture, French language and culture are part of my identity. So it's important for me, and I pointed out that I'll be an ally, not only for Quebecers, but for all Francophone Canadians across the country. I don't know if you know or not, I was educated in French in Toronto, in a French secondary and primary school.
On va prendre une dernière question parce qu'il reste 2 minutes seulement.
2 minutes
Est-ce qu'il y a une
left.
dernière question?
Is there a last question for Mr. Baylis?
Parfait.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Ça marche. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that was Frank Baylis, former Montreal MP and businessman, seeking to return to politics as the Prime Minister, answering his questions. The other 3 candidates will come out. They'll have about 10 minutes to take questions. It'll be run, we're told, by their campaigns, their individual press secretaries. We got about a 5-minute gap. I want to go back to Emily Nicola before I cut you off. And I'm sorry, if someone comes out, I may do it again. Emily, do not take it personally. But the attack on the Hamas slip-up by Mark Carney earlier, you're saying, the conservative attacks, they work very well in English Canada. Will it do anything in Quebec?
I don't think so. I don't think that in the moment, Francophones made a big deal out of it in the sense that you're used to hear
Okay, I've got to do it again. I'm sorry. Mark Carney is there, Emily. Blame the former governor of the Bank. Here's Liberal leader Mark Carney. The Liberal leader candidate.
I believe that it sounded like you supported Hamas, and we're wondering, does that mean that your command of the language is not strong enough to do this job, sir?
I'll answer you. You asked me in English. I'll answer in English. I said that we all were in agreement against Hamas, or at least the intention. No, I look forward, if I'm selected as Liberal leader, I look forward to having a debate avec Yves, François Blanchet et Pierre Poilievre dans la langue française. Et ce qui est Sorry, I'll answer it. I look forward to having a debate with them in French. And I have to be clear, to be absolutely clear, and I began my response with respect to the Middle East about the fundamental issue that all the hostages have to be returned to their families. And of course, Hamas has no place ever in any future discussions. Point final.
Et français pour la dernière chose sur Hamas, s'il vous plaît.
And on the last question in French. All right, fine. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and it should never have a role in discussions about the future of the Middle East.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney. Chrystia
Hello, Mr. Carney. Chrystia Noël, Radio Canada. The Conservatives say that because you come from business, you have conflicts of interest, and if you become Prime Minister, you won't have disclosed your conflicts before you become Prime Minister. Do you commit to disclosing your conflicts of interest before you become Prime Minister today? I don't have the job of Prime Minister. My job now is to try and get elected leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, and I'll follow all the conflict of interest rules. I'll do what needs to be done. The Conservative Party doesn't have a say on, doesn't really have anything to say on the real topics. And what was clear in this debate really is that Pierre Poilievre is the wrong person in the wrong time for Canada. You don't have a job, but you might have shares. Do you commit to disclose them? Of course I will. I will follow the rules to the letter.
Good evening, Mr. Carney. Justin Ling, Freeland. You talked about the kind of existential threat posed by Donald Trump to Canada and to some degree the world. But you didn't actually provide a lot of detail in terms of what you do to have Canada step up on the world stage. We've seen underfinancing of global aid, Ukraine, the Middle East, you name it. What would you actually do as Prime Minister, which you could be in a matter of weeks, to replace American power around the world?
Wow, Justin, that is a big question, that Canada would fully be able to replace American power. But we, with our values, can replace where America has retreated from. I mean, I think that's first and foremost. So a commitment to principles internationally would be there. Secondly, in terms of our role internationally, and again, I'm going to come back to Pierre Poilievre, something that came out in this debate. This is a person who would cancel all our aid. We're having discussions right now about a potential peace process in Ukraine, which can only happen if Ukraine is at the table. The Ukrainians are at the table. But it will be a situation where it requires additional support. We're discussing a situation in the Middle East where, assuming that, and it's a big assumption, that we proceed through the first phase and the return of all the hostages, there will need to be aid for Gaza. There needs to be aid for Gaza. Again, Pierre Poilievre will cancel all of that. He'll retreat absolutely from the world. And why will he do that? Because all he's doing is following the lead of Donald Trump.
Next question. Question.
Good evening, Mr. Carney. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. Your position on an east-west pipeline is unclear. You previously stated that you would use emergency powers to push this through, and said you would not impose a pipeline on Quebec. So can you clarify what your stance is on this? What conditions need to be in place for this to move forward?
Okay, so there's two things. Anytime you build a pipeline or any large piece of infrastructure that crosses provincial boundaries, the federal government has a role. It has a role in terms of environmental assessment. It has a role in terms of authorizations. The point of using those powers at this time of crisis, and I would remind we are in an economic crisis, not of our making, but the point of using those powers is to speed the process of federal approvals. But federal approvals themselves do not yield the infrastructure being made, because the infrastructure needs, as came out in the debate quite rightly, the approvals of the provinces themselves, as well as, if they are affected, First Nations.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. Carney, Trias, Global News. You're a close friend of Ms. Freeland. Do you think
Almost too close, it sounded like during the...
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that. Do you think your close relationship was a hindrance in terms of challenging some of her positions on the debate stage?
Well, I think one of the things, well, first off, there are areas of agreement. But the second thing is to be clear. I just became a politician. I'm here for change. I'm here about the future moving forward. A lot of the discussion was about what has happened. I'm focused on the fact that the country is in a crisis. We need to take steps to address it. We can take steps to address it. The most important thing we can do is build our economy. Build our economy now. That will be good in and of itself for jobs for Canadians. It'll be good for raising salaries. It will be good to keeping down the cost of living, but it will also put us in a much stronger negotiating position vis-à-vis President Trump.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Mr. Carney. Olivier Ferrand-Boissé de TVA. Madame Freeland
Ms. Freeland and Mr. Poilievre are drawing a link between immigration and housing. You have said that that's not the case. You would maintain levels beyond 250,000 housing starts that are currently planned. Why would you continue to increase the gap between immigration and housing availability in a full-blown crisis? Well, as I've said, we revealed our housing plan today. It's now available on my website, markcarney.ca. There is a link, of course there is. We have to reestablish a balance in the housing market. Immigration rates have come down. There's now a cap which has been was implemented about a year ago now. And we have to keep that cap in place to rebalance the immigration system. Basically, we're saying the same thing.
We'll do last questions. Dernière question.
Last questions now.
Toronto Star. I think you've been asked this before, but I'm not sure you've clearly answered it. If you don't win this leadership race, will you 100% still run for a seat?
Yes.
And you will, for sure.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm going to give you another question, because I think I have answered this before. This is a bonus question. Because 100%, I'm all in. I've quit all my posts, burned all my bridges, so to speak. We're in a moment of crisis. I'm here to serve Canada. I will run for a seat. And if I have the honor of being selected by the voters in that seat, I will serve the full term, absolutely, without question, regardless of what happens in leadership. I'm running to win the leadership, to be clear. But just to finish that question off.
And for my bonus question,
I was hoping to give it to someone else, actually.
Election timing. I wanted to clarify about where you exactly stand on that. What circumstances precisely would have to be there in order for you to trigger an early election or try and govern?
Okay. As I said, and several things can be true at the same time, which won't give you the cleanest of answers, because the first thing I'm going to say is the most important, which is don't take a decision, particularly with respect to a negotiation or a potential negotiation with the Americans, before you have to. So we need to know what happens over the course of the next few weeks with respect to that. There are some circumstances, and I'll let you use your imagination, where it may make sense to recall Parliament, or for Parliament to sit from the 24th. We will do the responsible thing if I'm elected leader. Of course we will. We'll do the best thing for Canada. It is more likely that the best thing for Canada is that the government has a strong and clear mandate sooner to take the necessary steps to build this country. And the last point I want to make is that, and I think you heard it in that debate, we are in a crisis. This is a very, very difficult situation. But with it comes tremendous opportunity. And what one needs to do in a crisis is act. And I'm ready to act. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney saying there at the end he very emphatically intends to run and serve a full term whether he wins this race or not, which has been one of the quiet criticisms about Mark Carney, the suggestion that should he not win, he's going to go away. Should he win, run, lose the election, he's not going to stay and serve in the opposition benches. He says he's quit all of his posts, burned all of his bridges, as he says, and I'm here to serve Canada. So an interesting answer there. Emily, I'm going to try to sneak you in one more time. He dealt with it right off the top. So you go. I'm going to be quiet. And, oh no, Karina Gould's going. Karina Gould's walking up to the microphone. So we're just going to... I'm going to wrap and just wait for the next leader. That's what we're going to do from now on. Here's Karina Gould.
French immersion teachers, because they prepared me for this evening. Welcome, and thank you to all those teachers. Thank you, La Presse Canadienne. You heard Mr. Carney trip up occasionally in French. For example, he said, "We are with Hamas." How did you interpret that? And do you believe that his French is sufficient to go up against Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Blanchet in a debate? Well, debating at this level is difficult, and I understand that for people who don't have much experience it can happen, but it was a mistake, and I understood quite well that this is not what he meant. It was quite clear. I'm certainly ready to debate Mr. Blanchet and Mr. Poilievre in French today. Your French isn't perfect. What are you going to do to improve it? I'm going to continue speaking. I know my French isn't perfect, but I'm comfortable in it. I understand it. What I think is really special is that today we had a French language debate with 4 Anglophones. And I think that is something that shows how important bilingualism is here in Canada. And it's important for the Liberal Party as well. We want to make sure that even when people aren't francophones, we can get along, we can understand, and we can engage with French speakers in Quebec and across Canada. Ms. Gould, what do you have to say to those who aren't convinced that the Liberal leadership race isn't just going to end in a crowning of Mark Carney and it's already decided? Well, you've seen tonight that we're united within the Liberal Party, but there are differences among us. And there was a debate of ideas. So I believe for everyone there is an opportunity to see what we presented as candidates. I put forward my vision for the country, for our party, for our future. And as I said during the debate, I believe that I'm the candidate for the future, and the future begins today. Should you lose the leadership race, would you rather be a minister in a Carney government or in a Freeland government? What I'd like to do is win the race. Next question, please. You say this isn't the time to reduce spending within the public service. Would you cancel the process to reduce positions in the public service by 5,000 and the mandatory 3 days on site? This is a time when we're facing threats from the United States that could cause a great deal of difficulty for our economy. This is not the time, in my view, to sow chaos within the public service. So we need to have officials who can answer and step up and meet the needs of Canadians and of Canadian businesses. During the pandemic, we saw that when the Canadian government needs to act quickly to protect Canadians, we can and do. But disrupting our government our governance system at this time is not a good thing. What about existing measures to abolish 5,000 positions and the 3-day return to work on site? The 5,000 jobs are by attrition. These are people who would be leaving the public service and who are not being replaced. I think we should continue with that, but not reduce the public service at this time. This wouldn't be the responsible decision to make. That is a decision for Treasury Board.
During the debate, you said that the Canadian Charter is the Canadian Charter.
Correct.
I wanted to ask, what would you do as Prime Minister if the Legault government were to actually be able to pass a provincial constitution ahead of the 2026 elections?
Well, as I said, the Liberal Party of Canada is the party of the Charter and the rights and freedoms of Canadians. And we have one constitution in Canada and we have one charter in Canada. I respect that Quebec is unique, and I respect Quebec jurisdiction, but Canadians have a right to their rights and freedoms, and I would ensure that I protect that.
And what would the concrete actions that you would do?
Well, those are hypotheticals because we don't even know if that's something that will actually happen or not, so certainly I'll respond as necessary. But right now, I can tell you that my commitment to every single Canadian across this country is to ensure that their rights are protected within the framework of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Next question.
Hi, Ms. Gould. You said the provinces and territories have spent too much on health care without results and have to explain themselves. Could you expand on what you mean specifically, and how do you get this message across without sounding like the feds are coming in and messing around with the provincial jurisdiction?
Yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, the Canadian citizen is the Canadian citizen, whether they are asking for the federal government to do something or the provincial government to do something. There's one taxpayer who is paying those taxes. We have sent, and I believe in the federal transfers in health to the provinces and territories, billions of additional dollars for healthcare to be delivered to Canadians. And yet, what I have heard from people in every province and territory across this country is that they have trouble accessing a family doctor. Their emergency rooms are closing. Their wait times for surgeries are completely unacceptable. So at the end of the day, it's not about accountability to the federal government and how those dollars are being spent. It's accountability by provinces and territories to Canadian citizens on how those dollars are being spent. I think we need more results for the money that is being sent, and provinces and territories need to be clear with their own citizens on how that money is being spent so that they can be held accountable when it comes to the delivery of healthcare in our country.
Forgive me for the supplemental, but every time the premiers come to Ottawa, they always complain that Ottawa isn't giving them enough money, that Ottawa is trampling on their jurisdiction. However, meaning for the citizen, how do you get past the premiers themselves?
Yeah, well, you know what? Premiers have a responsibility to their citizens. As Prime Minister, my job is not to represent the ideas of the premiers. My job is to represent the ideas and the desires and the outcomes that Canadians want. And so what I would plan to do is to say, we absolutely want to send you these transfers, but you have an obligation and a responsibility to share with your own populations how that money is being spent. That's something that I did with the childcare agreements across this country, where we signed agreements that were for $30 billion with all 10 provinces and territories, but they had clear outcomes and objectives that each province and territory had to achieve in order to receive that funding. Healthcare is the responsibility and the jurisdiction of the provinces. The federal government transfers monies, but they have a responsibility and an accountability requirement to their own citizens.
Next.
La même chose en français? Okay.
The same thing in French? Sure. Provincial and territorial jurisdiction is responsible for delivering healthcare to Canadians across Canada. I believe that as a federal government, we have an obligation to our citizens to send those healthcare transfers, but the provinces and territories have an obligation and a responsibility to be transparent and to deliver services to their citizens. This is not necessarily being transparent to the federal government. That's not what we're asking. We're asking for them to be transparent with their own populations. So we need to ensure that transfers, health transfers, are transparent. Because what I'm hearing from Canadians in every province and territories is that they're having difficulty in finding a family doctor. They're having so much frustration because their local emergency rooms are closing because of staff shortages, and they're waiting far too long for surgeries. That's not acceptable. So provinces and territories have a responsibility to deliver those services to their populations and to be transparent with their populations about how the money received from the federal government is being spent.
Hi, Ms. Gould. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. You've been pitching yourself as a candidate for the future, and yet you seem to be the candidate who is willing to spend the most and continue deficits. Aren't you concerned about debt for future generations?
Investing in Canadians and fighting poverty is something that will save us money in the long term. I'm the candidate for the future because elections are about the future. They're not about what we've done in the past. People want to know what your plan and your vision is for Canada, and I have spent the past 6 weeks sharing my ideas openly, transparently with Canadians about what my vision is for this country. And I believe in Canada, and I believe that we can tackle these big issues like housing, like affordability, like fighting climate change, like actually creating an economy that builds more entrepreneurs. And so I am going to continue to share this vision with Canadians because I think that as Canada, we should be ambitious for our future because this is the country in the world that can actually do that. Okay. Thank you very much. Merci tout le monde. J'ai hâte de te voir demain.
Thank you. Happy to see you again tomorrow for the English debate.
Bye. Merci.
Okay, that was the third of the Liberal leadership candidates to speak post-debate. That was Karina Gould giving Mark Carney a pass for his slip-up on Hamas, which I think reasonable-minded people would do, that he confused a preposition in his second language, but did also say debating at this level is difficult, which is an interesting comment. She was asked if she didn't win, would she rather be a minister in the Freeland government or the Carney government, and she said, well, I want to win, and then some long questions there on federal provincial health transfers. I want to go to Emily, but I'm terrified Chrystia Freeland is going to walk out.
Do you, David?
So I'm going to make Chrystia Freeland magically appear by saying, Emily, finish your thought.
I'm just really glad that we're over this Hamas thing already,
Yep.
because the thing is, the Conservative ads is a way for them to try to control what is the big headline after this debate.
Okay.
And trying to make sure that it was about that. And I'm glad that the journalists are not falling into that trap right now and making sure that they're asking questions about what actually happened.
Okay, you got your answer in, and here's Chrystia Freeland.
We're working so hard. Thank you for being here. I'm very grateful to be here this evening with 3 other Liberals who love our country and to have the opportunity to speak to the 400,000 Liberals who also love our country. Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump agree. They both think Canada is broken. We know that Canada is not broken. This is a critical and historical moment for our country. Canadians are united as never before, and as never before, Canadians understand how important it is to support our country. I am very glad to be here with my Liberal colleagues because we are the party that will and can defend Canada, that will and can fight for our wonderful country. Glad to be here and ready to answer your questions.
You are, I presume, running against Mark Carney, as the 2 others were on that stage. But it really felt like tonight what we heard was everyone agreeing with each other. We heard a lot of, I agree, I agree, I agree. How are you going to win this race if it sounds like most of the evening you spent the time agreeing with the forerunner?
A leadership race is very different from other political contests. This is a race inside the family, inside our party. And it's a really good thing that we are agreed about very many things. And the thing that we agree on above all is that right now, Pierre Poilievre cannot win the next election. He is not the guy to stand up to Trump, and I know that Liberals across the country get that, and that's why there is this wave of excitement and energy in the Liberal Party, which is such a good thing. I was here tonight, and I'll be here tomorrow night, to make the case to Liberals that I am the person, I am the woman for the job. I uniquely recognize the threat that Trump poses to Canada today. My whole life experience has been about the fight between democracy and dictatorship. It's been about the rise of oligarchs and plutocrats and how they contribute to that. And my political work has been about standing up to Trump and standing up to Putin and working with the provinces and territories on big projects. So I know I am the person, I am the woman to lead the Liberal Party right now and to be our next Prime Minister. And traveling across the country, talking to Liberals across the country, that is what I'm hearing too. You know, I started with a story about something that touched me really personally. I was in the home of some great Liberals in Saskatoon, and this little girl called Ari came up to me. She was with her mother, you know, like little 4-year-olds can be, hanging onto her mother's skirt. And she said to me, "Can you stop Trump from invading Canada?" I get asked that question a dozen times a day in my meeting with Liberals. So I know that this is front of mind, and I know that I am the person today, the leader today, uniquely prepared to meet that challenge. So that's why I'm running, and that's why I believe that I can win.
Follow up? Why should Liberal members not vote for Mark Carney?
Liberals should vote for me because I am the woman uniquely able to lead Canada at this critical moment. This moment when we need to stand up to Trump, this moment when our economy and our sovereignty itself are being challenged. I have the plan. I have the demonstrated experience delivering on it. I have the guts to do this and the deep understanding of this critical moment. And I am hearing from Liberals across the country that they recognize, as I have done from the beginning of my campaign, that this is the issue. This is the issue for all Canadians. It's the issue for all Liberals in this leadership race, and it will be the ballot question in the next election. And that's why I'm the person to lead the Liberal Party. I'm the person to lead our country, and I am the person who can beat Pierre Poilievre.
Chrystia.
Bonjour, Madame Freeland. Chrystia Noël de Radio-Canada.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. To build east-west pipelines for oil or natural gas, are you ready to go ahead without Quebec's agreement? Thank you for the question. I've said from the very start that the core of my campaign turns around the fact that I uniquely understand that this is a critical moment. I believe we need to be strong, united, and smart. I'll start with unity because at a critical time like now, national unity is more important than ever. I believe that we need to build towards energy security in the future, and I hope that Canadians across Canada will agree. And I hope that I'll be able to work with the provinces and territories to accomplish that. But it needs to be done, and it has to be done cooperatively. So if Quebec says no, no pipeline, I am truly convinced that Canadians will be ready to seize the opportunity that this crisis represents, and that it will be possible to work cooperatively. I will make one promise, and it is that I will work very cooperatively with the provinces and territories. I will work with Quebec. That's more important than ever.
Freeland, Justin Ling, Freelance. We heard a lot about the existential threat that Donald Trump poses to Canada and to the world order. We've seen France and the UK and others try and step up to replace American largesse around defense, aid, and elsewhere. You could be the Prime Minister in a matter of weeks. What would you do to replace American power, whether it's in Ukraine, foreign aid, the Middle East, wherever? What would you do differently than what Canada has done thus far?
Excellent question. And I put forward a policy proposal either today or yesterday, talking about precisely this. Friedrich Merz, who leads the party that was in the strongest position in the German elections, likely the next chancellor, was very clear after the German elections yesterday. And he said, we need to accept that we are in a Europe where the US may no longer be present and may no longer be there to guarantee European security. That's true for Canada as well. We need to accept that that may be the world we're living in. I've been thinking about this a long time. I gave a speech in 2018 talking about how the Americans may be throwing off that mantle of responsibility, of leadership for the free world. That may be what we're seeing. And so it means very concretely, Canada needs to step up. We need to step up in working with our allies. I would say starting with Europe, starting with France and the UK, the nuclear powers in Europe. I would say starting with the Nordic countries with whom we share the Arctic. I would put a particular focus on Denmark, whose sovereignty is being threatened as well. From my own contacts, I can tell you the Europeans are urgently interested in a Canada that wants to step up as a closer economic and also security partner. So our allies are just waiting for us to be more involved, more ambitious, and to be looking at a way that we guarantee our shared security without the US. Second thing I would say is it does mean we have to spend more to defend ourselves right now. And that's why I put forward in my suite of policy proposals a plan to get up to 2% of defense spending by 2027. It's very important that we do defense differently. We need to be spending the money at home with our own Canadian companies, and also learn some of the lessons of the war in Ukraine, which is areas like drones, areas like cyber, areas like AI can be as important to defense as some more traditional technologies. So that's where I'd start.
Just really briefly, does that mean Canadian troops replacing American ones leaving Poland? Does it mean peacekeepers in Ukraine? Does it mean security assurances for Kiev in an eventual deal? Can you give some concrete examples?
Yeah. So Canada is already present in supporting our NATO partners on the border with Russia. As you know, Canada leads NATO troops in the Enhanced Forward Presence group in Latvia. That is a good thing. We need to continue to do it. I do support Canada contributing to an allied force of peacekeepers in Ukraine. And Canada is in a very good position to do that. We have been training Ukrainians with Operation Unifier since 2015.
I'm being told we have time for one quick last question before we have to leave.
Bonjour, Marianne Despelteau, Franco-Presse.
Marianne Despelteau, Franco-Presse. You talked about adding daycare spaces. Outside Quebec, 4 out of 5 children have no space in a French language daycare under the current government. Can you make a commitment to prioritize Francophone daycares in adding those spaces? Yes, within Quebec or outside Quebec? Both. Daycare is a massive priority for me. It is one of the things of which I am proudest as finance minister, that I am the Minister of Finance who, for the very first time, created a national daycare and early childhood system. I want to thank Quebec feminists who paved the way, and personally thank Ms. Pauline Marois, whom I consulted in establishing the system. Yes, I have a plan to add 100,000 daycare spaces. And you're quite right. Today, more than ever, French is important. Language begins at daycare. I know that myself as a mother of three children who speak a language that is not French with me. They speak Ukrainian with me. So yes, French language spaces within and outside Quebec will be a priority. Thank you. Very quick supplementary, please. Émilie Bergeron, La Presse Canadienne. We heard you correct Mr. Carney's French a number of times during the debate. You seemed either to help him or perhaps to show Liberal members that you think you speak French better than he does. What were you trying to do with that? I just remember the question on Hamas. I know Mark well, and I know his positions. And for me, as a Liberal, it was important to clarify that position for all Canadians and for all Liberals, because I knew in that moment that it could be dangerous for all of us. So that was an instant that went by very quickly, but I do know what Mark thinks about this, and I knew that it could be dangerous for all of us not to make sure that we were very clear. So does he speak French well enough to debate Mr. Poilievre or Mr. Blanchette? I have to say that as an Anglophone, French is a difficult language. When I was elected for the first time in 2013, I come from northern Alberta. My French was very weak. French is my fifth language. It was very weak. But I made the decision. Well, it wasn't really a decision. I understood that to be a politician in Canada, particularly a minister, particularly a leader, it was and is essential to communicate in both official languages. That, for me, is a mark of respect for Francophones. Francophones in Quebec and around the country have the right to speak to their leaders in French. And as Minister of Finance, I have insisted at meetings with business people. Often business people here in Quebec do speak excellent English, but I've always insisted on speaking French because I believe that you, the people of Quebec, have the right to speak to your Minister of Finance and, of course, your Prime Minister in French. For myself today, Donald Trump is a threat to our economy, to our sovereignty, and to our identity. And bilingualism, French, is a crucial part of Canadian identity. So for me, that is a personal and emotional issue. It's very important. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. I know it's very late for everyone.
Okay, that is the final Liberal leadership candidate we're going to hear from this evening, Chrystia Freeland, squeezing a 10-minute post-debate media availability into 17. We've had to say goodbye to our Rosemary Barton. She is off doing analysis on the National. We've got about 4.5 minutes where we've got to give the network away. So we're going to do a quick roundtable assessment with Emily Nicola, Jonathan Baylis, Caroline Bryan, and Vandana Cotter. Excuse me. Jono, let's start with you. Your headline from this debate and the scrums of what we heard, where do you think things are right now after the French language debate with the English debate coming tomorrow?
No big change. I think that, yes, Karina Gould had the best debate tonight, but I think that it doesn't really change, I don't think, the outlook on who's going to win this. If Mark Carney goes in tomorrow night and has a weak debate after some challenges with French, maybe that'll change, but right now I don't see any change. Okay, Emily, I'm afraid to go to you because someone will come out to the microphone. I'm going to try it anyway. What's your big takeaway from this evening's festivities?
Everybody agrees with one another. Yes. Everybody is more or less comfortable with French, but not in a way that sunk anyone. And so nothing has changed. And that it wasn't the most exciting debate in Canadian debate history. Okay,
Caroline, your thoughts?
Leadership races and leadership debates are a good thing for political parties, and tomorrow night these candidates should be a little less afraid to throw a few punches because it's for the good of the ultimate victor of this contest that they get some practice before they hit the real thing.
Do you think that will happen? Just quickly, do you think they'll go there, Caroline?
I think when they're in their mother tongues, which all of them will be tomorrow, they will feel more comfortable doing that. So I think there's a chance, yeah.
Okay, Vandana, what are your thoughts?
I think the feedback they'll receive is that agreeing with everyone wasn't helpful to get anyone pull apart from anyone else, and it stays the same right now. It looks like Mark Carney's still a front runner. His French is forgiving enough that people just know that I'd rather bet on him and have him practice that a bit more. I think the winner was Karina Gould, but I don't think it still changes anything.
Okay, Jonathan, your thoughts looking ahead to tomorrow, the English debate?
I think it'll be hopefully more enjoyable because they'll be more comfortable. And so I agree that this was not the greatest debate in history and probably will not be memorable. Hopefully tomorrow won't be memorable like for any major gaffes, but hopefully they'll just be steadier and we'll really get into a little bit more meat on some policy discussions. Okay, so Emily, the headline I have here is Liberals bored by Liberal debate. As the other journalists on the panel, what's your thoughts? What are you looking for tomorrow in the English one?
I guess we got a preview in the question period after the debate, where everybody was already feistier and more assertive in making their points. And so somehow the scrum after the debate was more passionating than the debate itself. And so I'm really looking forward to the debate tomorrow in terms of actually bringing up a little bit of passion.
Okay, Caroline, quickly, do you think Chrystia Freeland or Karina Gould can win the whole thing if they don't do damage to Mark Carney tomorrow?
Can they win the whole leadership?
Yeah, win it. Do you think there's a path?
I think anything can happen in a debate and anything can happen in the 14 days remaining, and a lot of that may hinge on Trump. So I'm not ready to call anything, but if nothing changes, then no.
Okay, Vandana, what do you think? What needs to happen tomorrow for the front runner to lose his inevitability?
He would have to really mess up and show that he's really bad on his feet and make you think that in a campaign moment that he won't be able to survive, that he'll have gaffes that the Conservatives can take and use in advertising, and that he's not quick enough on his feet and he still needs some polish on being the politician that he's
So if he endorses Hamas in English tomorrow, we know there's a problem, right? That's a joke. That is a joke. We know he misspoke in French, and everybody gave him a pass out of Jonathan's having a stroke there off camera. Okay, we got to say goodbye. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'll be back at 5 o'clock tomorrow, Power and Politics. Jonathan Baylis, Emily Nicola, Caroline Bryan, Vandana Cotter will be back for coverage of the English debate tomorrow. But for now, we're going to hand things over to Adrienne Arsenault. You've heard of her, an up-and-comer in the network, and the National, which is already in progress.